step into landscapes few have dared to enter, where forests, mountains, and isolated coastlines guard secrets that refuse to be revealed. You will trace footprints pressed into frozen soil, observe nests woven high in bamboo canopies, and hear calls echoing through valleys that seem impossibly still. In the Caucasus ridges, the jungles of Central Africa, and the highlands of Asia, you will encounter evidence recorded by careful researchers, signs of creatures that defy classification and challenge the boundaries of known wildlife. Every shadow, every sound, and every anomaly asks you to consider what might move unseen, lingering just beyond human knowledge, and to weigh the unexplained against what you think you know. Into the ridges of the Caucasus, Russia. The Caucasus Mountains rise in tangled ridges between the Black and Caspian Seas, a landscape of fractured limestone, deep forests, and high pastures that for centuries resisted full mapping, and it was into this terrain that Soviet researchers were drawn by persistent reports of an unknown, human-like creature known locally as the almas. Long before official interest, shepherds, hunters, and border patrols described encounters with a tall, powerfully built figure covered in dark hair, moving upright across mountain slopes and vanishing into ravines with unsettling speed. These accounts were not isolated folk tales, but appeared repeatedly across regions of Dagestan, Chechnya, and Kabardino-Balkaria, forming a pattern that Soviet authorities could not entirely ignore. By the mid-20th century, the Soviet Union maintained an extensive scientific apparatus devoted to cataloguing the natural world within its borders, and unexplained zoological reports were sometimes treated as problems of incomplete data rather than fantasy. In the 1950s, following renewed interest in relict hominins, scholars associated with the Soviet Academy of Sciences began reviewing archival material, ethnographic records, and military logs referencing strange encounters in the Caucasus. Among those most invested was historian and philosopher Boris Porshnev, who argued that the almas might represent a surviving population of archaic humans, a hypothesis that placed the Caucasus expeditions at the uneasy boundary between anthropology and zoology. Field investigations were not announced publicly, but small teams were quietly dispatched under the guise of geological surveys and ethnographic studies. These expeditions focused on highland villages where almas sightings were considered recent rather than legendary, often relying on local guides who knew seasonal migration routes and abandoned shelters deep in the mountains. Researchers documented footprints described as broader than human, with pronounced toes and a stride length that suggested unusual height and strength. Plaster casts were attempted, though uneven terrain and weather frequently degraded the impressions before proper analysis could be completed. The Caucasus presented logistical challenges that complicated any sustained search, with steep gradients, sudden weather shifts, and regions still poorly connected by roads. Many areas were accessible only on foot or horseback, forcing teams to establish temporary camps near alpine meadows and forest edges. These locations were selected based on reports of the almas foraging near livestock enclosures or appearing briefly at dawn or dusk. Despite extended observation periods, direct visual confirmation remained elusive, reinforcing the sense that something was actively avoiding prolonged human contact. Local testimony formed a crucial component of the expeditions, and Soviet researchers approached these accounts with a mixture of skepticism and cautious respect. Villagers consistently described the almas as neither animal nor human, noting their lack of speech, pronounced brow ridges, and distinctive odour, details that appeared across separate communities with minimal contact. Some accounts included reports of the creature stealing food or tools, behaviour interpreted by investigators as opportunistic rather than aggressive. These descriptions were carefully transcribed and compared, forming a body of qualitative data that resisted easy dismissal. Archival records later revealed that Soviet military units stationed in the Caucasus had also logged unusual encounters, particularly during night patrols near border zones. Soldiers reported silhouettes crossing mountain passes where no civilians were permitted, leaving tracks that did not match issued footwear or known wildlife. While these reports were often attributed to smugglers or deserters, follow-up searches occasionally found no evidence of human passage. Such anomalies were quietly forwarded to scientific committees, adding a layer of institutional curiosity to what had previously been considered rural rumour. Biological evidence remained frustratingly ambiguous, yet several expeditions collected hair samples found snagged on tree bark or rock outcrops along remote trails. Preliminary microscopic examinations suggested mammalian origin but did not conclusively match known regional species. At the time, DNA analysis was unavailable, leaving researchers to rely on morphology in comparison with reference collections. These samples were archived rather than published, their uncertain status reflecting the broader tension surrounding the ALMA's investigations. The geopolitical climate of the Cold War influenced how far these inquiries could proceed, as Soviet science was expected to produce practical or ideological value. Porshniev's hypothesis of a relict hominin clashed with prevailing evolutionary models and faced resistance from academic peers. Funding for extended expeditions became sporadic and some field teams were reassigned to more conventional research. Yet the persistence of new reports ensured that interest never fully disappeared, lingering in internal correspondence and unpublished notes. One of the most debated aspects of the Caucasus searches involved historical accounts predating modern sightings, including references in medieval travelogues and regional chronicles. These sources described wild people inhabiting mountain margins, captured occasionally, and failing to adapt to settled life. Soviet researchers treated these texts cautiously, aware of the tendency for myth to grow around unfamiliar groups, yet the continuity of description across centuries raised difficult questions. If entirely fictional, the Almas legend had shown remarkable stability. As expeditions progressed, researchers began to consider ecological explanations for the creature's apparent scarcity, noting that the Caucasus contained numerous caves, dense forests, and high-altitude refuges rarely visited by humans. Seasonal movement patterns of wildlife suggested that a large omnivorous primate could theoretically survive by exploiting isolated food sources. This line of reasoning did not prove the existence, but it undermined arguments that such a creature was impossible within the region's ecology. By the late 1960s, official expeditions had largely ceased, though individual scientists and enthusiasts continued informal investigations. Soviet archives, partially opened decades later, confirmed that the state had taken the Almas reports seriously enough to warrant repeated field inquiries. The absence of definitive proof did not erase the documented effort, only highlighting the limits of mid-century field science when confronted with an intelligent, elusive subject. Modern researchers revisiting these records have noted how cautiously the original teams framed their conclusions, rarely asserting belief, but also rarely dismissing the phenomenon outright. The Caucasus expeditions stand as an example of institutional curiosity operating under constraint, shaped by political, scientific, and environmental pressures. What remains striking is not what was proven, but how consistently investigators encountered traces that suggested something just beyond confirmation. An important but often understated contribution came from French-born Soviet researcher Marie-Jeanne Kaufman, who spent decades collecting testimony and physical descriptions related to the Almas across the Caucasus and Central Asia. Trained in medicine and anthropology, Kaufman conducted interviews in remote mountain villages during the 1960s and 1970s, carefully documenting anatomical details reported by witnesses rather than retelling folklore. She noted repeated references to a sloping forehead, long arms, and a walking gait described as stiff yet purposeful. Her work, though controversial, was grounded in field observation and comparative anatomy, and it reinforced the idea that the Almas reports followed a consistent biological template rather than a purely symbolic one. Parallel to these efforts, Soviet anthropologists quietly compared Almas's descriptions with known fossil hominins, including Neanderthals whose remains had been discovered within the broader Caucasus region decades earlier. The mountains had already proven capable of preserving evidence of ancient human populations, complicating arguments that a relict hominin was geographically implausible. While no expedition produced skeletal remains or photographic proof, the convergence of paleontology, ecology, and eyewitness testimony sustained a narrow but persistent line of inquiry. The absence of resolution did not eliminate the question. Instead, it fixed it in an uncomfortable space between what had been mapped and what remained just beyond reach. Even now, hikers and shepherds in remote Caucasus valleys continue to report fleeting encounters that echo those documented decades earlier, preserving a thread of continuity that links past expeditions to the present. The mountains remain vast, folded, and indifferent to human certainty, offering countless places where something could move unseen. And in that enduring silence, the Almas have never been fully ruled out, only left waiting beyond the ridgelines where the searches always seem to end. Somewhere in the Caucasus, beyond recorded paths and unfinished surveys, the question that drew those expeditions into the mountains still waits without an answer. The Zana Valley Search, Abkhazia. Hidden beneath thick vegetation and steep hills, the valley villages of Abkhazia developed in relative isolation, shaped by geography that limited outside contact long before modern borders existed. It was within this narrow, forested landscape that reports emerged of a woman known as Zana, described in ways that defied easy classification. Unlike the creatures of folklore whispered about in distant forests, Zana lived openly among villagers, observed, interacted with, and yet was simultaneously alien to the people who maintained their daily routines around her. Her presence suggested that something extraordinary had survived into recorded history, an anomaly both biological and social. Long before scientists examined the case, local memory preserved detailed accounts of Zana, remembered not as a spirit or legend but as a tangible figure whose actions could be observed. Villagers recalled her immense physical strength, the long hair that covered her body, and the deep, unfamiliar sounds she sometimes produced. These were not fleeting stories told to entertain outsiders. They were repeated by multiple families over decades. Each retelling emphasized her human-like qualities while simultaneously highlighting traits that defied conventional understanding, creating a tension between familiarity and incomprehensibility that would later attract scientific scrutiny. Accounts collected in the 19th century describe Zana's arrival in the valley not as a migration, but as a forceful capture that immediately set her apart from those who confined her. She was reportedly taken from the surrounding forests and brought to a local estate, where her behaviour, refusal to wear clothing, resistance to ordinary domestic routines, and extraordinary strength made her a subject of intense curiosity. Observers noted her ability to traverse difficult terrain effortlessly, carrying loads that would have taxed the strongest local labourers. Such accounts were recorded by estate managers, travellers, and occasional visiting officials, creating a surprisingly robust historical trail. Descriptions recorded across multiple sources emphasized physical traits that villagers struggled to place within familiar human categories, even as they interacted with her daily. Witnesses noted pronounced facial features, unusually long limbs, and an upright gait, but unlike that of any known local population. Anthropologists later reviewing these accounts remarked on the consistency of these details, even when collected decades apart and in separate villages. The descriptions were never sensationalized in the sources themselves. They were matter-of-fact observations of a person who appeared simultaneously human and other. When Soviet researchers later revisited these records, they encountered a case that resisted easy classification and defied the assumptions applied to folklore or medical anomaly alike. Archivists and ethnographers examined tax records, personal diaries, and oral histories, noting the repeated emphasis on Zana's exceptional strength and isolation from conventional social behaviour. The case challenged prevailing scientific models of the time, and while researchers approached it cautiously, they could not dismiss the sheer weight of consistent testimony. Zana represented a living puzzle in a region already known for its complex ethnography and deep history of human settlement. Rather than tracking a creature through the wilderness, investigators walked the remains of former estates and abandoned structures tied directly to Zana's reported life. They mapped paths she was said to traverse, inspected ruins where she had been confined, and examined the surrounding forest for signs of habitation. Unlike expeditions seeking a cryptid in unknown terrain, these researchers confronted a landscape shaped by centuries of human activity. Each structural remnant, from stone walls to cleared pasture, served as both evidence of human habitation and a stage upon which the extraordinary life of Zana had unfolded. One detail repeatedly unsettled researchers more than her appearance, namely the claim that Zana bore children who lived among the local population. Records indicated that she had multiple offspring, some of whom were reportedly integrated into local communities. Anthropologists noted the difficulty this posed for classification. Her biological influence persisted in a documented lineage, offering a tangible trace of her existence, while complicating any effort to categorize her solely as a human anomaly. These descendants became a living connection to a mystery that had otherwise resisted direct observation. Recent studies of oral history and genealogical records in the Zana Valley suggest that some of her descendants may have inherited traits that stood out even within local populations. Anthropologists examining family lineages documented traits such as above-average height, unusual strength, and distinctive facial features that reportedly persisted among her children and grandchildren. While no formal genetic study of Zana's line has been published, these observations intrigued researchers attempting to reconcile documented physical characteristics with historical accounts of her unusual appearance. Local communities recall stories emphasizing both her maternal role and the visible difference of her offspring, creating a rare instance where oral history aligns with physical continuity. These details reinforce the impression that Zana was not merely an isolated individual, but part of a living legacy that challenged contemporary understanding of human variation in the region. Anthropological assessments focused carefully on recorded behaviors and reported anatomy, comparing them against known ranges of human variation without drawing immediate conclusions. Experts examined skeletal measurements, dental traits, and the few surviving physical descriptions, attempting to align them with regional populations and broader patterns in human morphology. While some traits appeared to fall within extreme human variation, others, particularly muscle development, proportions, and reported endurance, challenged conventional frameworks. The persistent ambiguity kept Zana in a liminal space, neither fully human in the scientific sense nor dismissed as a mere legend. Complicating the analysis further was the Caucasus region's established role in paleoanthropology, with fossil evidence confirming that archaic humans once inhabited nearby terrain. Sites throughout the Caucasus, including caves in Georgia and southern Russia, had yielded Neanderthal and early Homo sapiens remains, demonstrating that the region could support archaic populations in isolation. Some scholars proposed that Zana might represent a relic lineage, though this remained speculative. The interplay of known fossil history with living anecdotal evidence made the Zana case a singular challenge for mid-20th century science. Despite growing interest, the case rarely appeared in public Soviet discourse, perhaps because it sat uncomfortably between scientific inquiry and ethical unease. The treatment of Zana during her lifetime, including confinement and scrutiny, raised moral questions that complicated any broader publicity. Researchers and officials maintained a cautious, often private approach, circulating findings internally while avoiding sensationalized interpretation. This discretion helped preserve detailed accounts, but it also contributed to the enduring sense of mystery surrounding both Zana herself and the societal responses she provoked. No preserved remains, photographs, or verified biological samples survived to resolve the questions raised by Zana's life, leaving investigators dependent on documentation alone. Archival notes, eyewitness testimonies, and property records form the primary evidentiary base. Scholars emphasized the difficulty of concluding such indirect material, but also noted the surprising consistency of descriptions over decades. The absence of physical proof reinforced the chapter's tension. Everything pointed to an extraordinary presence, yet nothing could confirm the full reality of what the villagers had witnessed. In later decades, historians and researchers returned to the Zana case not to sensationalize it, but to understand why it remained so resistant to resolution. Publications analyzing the archives highlighted her children, the geographical isolation of the valley, and the sustained consistency of eyewitness accounts. While debates about her identity persisted, contemporary scholars agreed on one point: the evidence resisted neat categorization. This unresolved status, framed by careful historical and anthropological scholarship, ensured that the Zana Valley remained both compelling and elusive as a subject of inquiry. Today, the valley where these events unfolded appears outwardly unremarkable, its silence offering no clues to what once challenged those who lived there. Paths once walked by Zana have grown over, and the buildings that housed her story have largely collapsed or been reclaimed by vegetation. Yet the traces of human habitation, combined with surviving oral histories, preserve an uncanny sense that something extraordinary once passed through the area, leaving its imprint not in stone or bone, but in memory and the quiet persistence of inherited stories. What remains in the Zana Valley is not a story that faded away, but a record that still refuses to settle into any single explanation. Operation Deep Star. Puerto Rico Trench. Stretching nearly 8 kilometers below the Atlantic surface, the Puerto Rico Trench presents a realm of darkness and pressure so extreme that few human eyes have ever glimpsed its depths, yet reports suggest an unknown creature lurks there. The trench's topography is a staggering combination of steep slopes, abyssal plains, and underwater canyons that fold into near impenetrable darkness. Submersible pilots and sonar operators occasionally detect shapes inconsistent with known marine fauna, hinting at a presence massive enough to disturb the surrounding water in ways difficult to explain. The very notion that a large unknown organism could survive in such a hostile environment drew both fascination and skepticism from oceanographers worldwide. Decades before systematic expeditions, sailors and fishermen spoke of enormous shadowy forms moving beneath their vessels, glimpsed only for fleeting seconds in sonar echoes or under moonlight-silvered waters. Early naval logs occasionally mentioned disturbances in sonar that could not be correlated to submarines or schools of fish, while fishermen recounted lines snapping inexplicably or the sensation of something immense brushing past beneath their boats. These anecdotes, while anecdotal, displayed a remarkable consistency in describing size, movement and location, particularly around the trench's deepest sectors near the Puerto Rican and Dominican slopes. Such accounts laid the groundwork for a scientific investigation decades later. Operation Deep Star was conceived as a coordinated scientific response, combining oceanographic research, naval engineering, and deep-sea exploration technology to investigate anomalous readings reported in the trench. Teams of researchers, naval engineers, and marine biologists planned missions that would push the limits of existing submersible capabilities. Funding came from a mixture of governmental grants and private oceanographic institutions, reflecting both the high cost and the unusual ambition of the project. The objective was not merely observation but to collect samples, verify sonar anomalies, and attempt visual documentation, with the hope of discovering new species or resolving the mystery of the reported unknown entity. The trench itself is a labyrinth of undersea canyons, steep slopes and thermoclines that bend light and sound, creating an environment both alien and hostile to human observation. Pressure increases by roughly 1 atmosphere for every 10 meters of depth, meaning the deepest sections are subject to over 8,000 times the force experienced at sea level. Temperatures hover near freezing, while oxygen levels fluctuate in ways that limit both human endurance and equipment efficiency. Subtle topographical features can distort sonar readings, producing echoes that resemble large moving objects. Understanding this environment is essential to distinguishing between natural anomalies and the potential presence of an unknown creature. Advanced submersibles and remotely operated vehicles were deployed, outfitted with high-resolution cameras, pressure-resistant hulls, and sonar arrays capable of detecting large, moving objects far beyond human sight. The Deep Star fleet included vehicles capable of diving to near-trench depths, collecting water and biological samples, and recording real-time video. Engineers designed the submersibles to withstand extreme pressure and cold while maintaining maneuverability over steep canyon walls and across abyssal plains. Sensors measured salinity, temperature, and current speed, each of which was critical to differentiating between environmental artifacts and possible biological movement. Initial sonar scans produced perplexing results: unidentified shapes of considerable size traversing the abyssal plains, moving against currents in ways inconsistent with known marine species. These readings, often recorded during mid-depth passes, suggested either extraordinarily large animals or phenomena not yet understood. Teams logged multiple encounters where sonar contacts appeared to accelerate, change direction abruptly, or vanish altogether, defying the expected behavior of large deep-sea fauna such as giant squid or whales. Analysts debated whether tectonic activity, drifting debris, or unknown animals could explain the anomalies, but no single explanation accounted for all the observed data. Diving deeper into the trench, crews reported the disorienting sensation of weightless darkness, punctuated only by dim submersible lights glinting off ridges, debris, and the occasional, unexplained movement. Pilots described the oppressive scale of the environment, where walls drop steeply and shadows seemed to stretch indefinitely. Every canyon turn offered the potential for discovery or hazard, as rocky overhangs concealed unknown currents and jagged formations. In this environment, the presence of a large, unidentified organism could easily go unnoticed or be misinterpreted, which contributed both to the frustration and fascination of the expedition. Biologists recovered small fragments of unusual tissue, gelatinous matter, and scales that could not be conclusively attributed to any catalogued species, intensifying debate over the trench's unknown inhabitants. Samples were preserved in pressurized containers and analysed aboard the support vessel with preliminary microscopy suggesting unusual structural properties. While the fragments did not match known deep-sea fish or cephalopod tissue, the lack of complete specimens left their origin unresolved. Each fragment hinted at something real and tangible, but simultaneously reinforced the difficulty of confirming life forms in the trench's extreme environment. Further analysis of the trench environment revealed unusual hydrothermal activity and nutrient flows that could theoretically sustain large, previously undocumented species. Researchers noted that cold seeps, methane plumes, and isolated underwater ridges created microhabitats rich in chemosynthetic bacteria, forming the base of unique food webs. These nutrient pockets could, in theory, support larger predators adapted to extreme conditions, providing a plausible ecological framework for unknown species. Oceanographers compared the trench to other deep-sea regions where new giant squid species or bizarre fish have been discovered, noting similar environmental pressures and isolation. While no direct connection to the unidentified sonar traces was established, this context suggested that the trench's extreme environment might conceal life forms with adaptations beyond current biological expectations. Environmental hazards repeatedly interrupted the search. Sudden undersea currents, equipment malfunctions, and violent storms above, each reminding teams that the ocean itself was an adversary as formidable as any cryptid. Submersibles were occasionally forced to abort dives due to hull stress warnings or sensor failures, while surface crews struggled to maintain position over deep and unpredictable water. Even minor mistakes could result in catastrophic loss, emphasizing the trench's danger beyond the unknown creature. These challenges underscored that any discovery would require not only persistence, but extraordinary precision and resilience. Within the scientific teams, interpretations diverged sharply. Some suggested misread sonar or unknown but ordinary species, while others argued that anomalies pointed to a creature unclassified by contemporary biology. Biologists, engineers, and naval officers each brought differing methodologies and priorities, producing a complex debate over what constituted credible evidence. While some members emphasized caution, others hypothesized that the combination of sonar traces, visual anomalies, and environmental uniqueness warranted consideration of a large, unidentified deep-sea animal. This tension mirrored the broader challenge of studying ecosystems that humans cannot fully access. Local maritime knowledge added another layer, as Puerto Rican fishermen and Navy personnel recounted shadowy shapes and mysterious sounds beneath their vessels, often treated as unverified but persistent phenomena. Oral accounts described occasional thrashing noises, unexplained wake patterns, and fleeting glimpses of immense forms moving under the water. While these observations were anecdotal, they were noted for their consistency across decades and geographic distance, hinting that the trench may conceal creatures largely invisible to modern instruments. Researchers treated such testimonies cautiously, but the cultural dimension lent texture to the scientific investigation. Despite repeated dives, hours of video footage, and extensive sonar mapping, no definitive visual confirmation emerged, leaving Operation Deep Star's investigators to navigate a trench that both revealed and concealed in equal measure. Shadows and anomalies appeared on screens and monitors, but always retreated into the crushing darkness or were obscured by sediment plumes. The deeper the teams descended, the less reliable human senses became, and the more enigmatic the sonar signatures appeared. These experiences reinforced the trench's role as an environment capable of harboring life beyond human detection, where certainty remains perpetually out of reach. Contemporary oceanographers continue to examine the data, modelling abyssal ecosystems and noting that vast regions remain unexplored, implying that whatever might exist there could evade detection indefinitely. Advancements in autonomous submersibles, deep-water sonar arrays, and environmental DNA analysis offer new possibilities, yet the trench's immensity ensures that only a fraction has been directly observed. Each layer of water, canyon, and ridge represents both a barrier and an opportunity, reminding scientists that the deep ocean remains one of Earth's least understood frontiers. The potential for large, unknown organisms persists not as legend, but as a plausible reality constrained by inaccessibility. Far below the surface, where pressure crushes and light ceases, the Puerto Rico Trench holds its inhabitants in silence, and whatever moves there remains beyond human comprehension. The Himachal Snow Track Survey, India. High in the snow-clad passes of Himachal Pradesh, where winds carve the ice into sharp ridges, rumours of a towering bipedal creature persisted, glimpsed only fleetingly by shepherds and mountaineers navigating the frozen terrain. Villagers spoke in hushed tones of a being that moved upright through drifts and rocky outcrops, leaving behind footprints far larger than any human could produce. These accounts, often dismissed by outsiders as superstition, drew the attention of researchers determined to separate myth from possible reality. The sheer remoteness of the valleys, combined with sudden blizzards and avalanche-prone slopes, created a landscape where both human and unknown presences could vanish without a trace. For more than a century, records described strange footprints pressed into fresh snow, accompanied by fleeting shadows and guttural calls that defied identification by locals or colonial observers. British surveyors in the 19th century noted villagers' descriptions of immense creatures with broad shoulders, dark fur, and the uncanny ability to move silently across difficult terrain. Some reports claimed that flocks of sheep or goats would scatter without visible cause, hinting at the creature's proximity. While no physical evidence was collected at the time, the consistency of these observations across decades and villages lent a persistent weight to the stories. Modern surveys were organised with meticulous attention to logistics, assembling mountaineers, ecologists and guides familiar with the treacherous ridges and remote valleys where sightings persisted. Teams equipped with snowshoes, climbing gear and insulated shelters embarked during the winter months when tracks were most likely to be preserved. Guides, often lifelong residents of high-altitude settlements, shared knowledge of seasonal snow patterns, avalanche zones and hidden ravines, directing researchers toward areas where previous sightings were reported. Every expedition required careful planning to ensure survival in temperatures well below freezing, sometimes plunging to -30 degrees Celsius at night. The terrain itself is a formidable adversary, with ice-laden cliffs, glacial rivers, and avalanche-prone slopes that challenge both endurance and equipment at every step. Crevasses and unstable snow bridges demanded constant vigilance, while sub-zero wind chills threatened frostbite and hypothermia. Observers often found themselves navigating narrow ledges above sheer drops, the silence punctuated only by the howl of mountain winds or the cracking of ice underfoot. In this environment, a large, elusive creature could easily avoid detection, vanishing as quickly as it appeared, leaving only ambiguous signs behind. Tracking efforts relied on a combination of snow prints, disturbed vegetation, and the occasional hair sample, all examined under the scrutiny of scientists determined to separate evidence from imagination. Plaster casts of footprints were made where snow conditions allowed, while careful notes recorded the stride depth and claw impressions. Biologists collected samples of fur or scat, later analysed in laboratory conditions to determine species origin. Each fragment of evidence was treated cautiously, with the understanding that contamination, weather, or misinterpretation could easily produce false positives in such extreme conditions. Shepherds in the upper valleys spoke of enormous, dark figures moving upright among snowdrifts, often leaving behind footprints larger than any known Himalayan predator. They described the creature as generally avoiding humans, but occasionally leaving fresh tracks near villages, sometimes at night or during dawn, when livestock were most vulnerable. Villagers' stories consistently noted the height, gait, and the way it seemed to pause and observe before moving into forested slopes. These accounts were taken seriously by researchers because of their occurrence across unconnected communities, suggesting a phenomenon beyond simple folklore. Teams of researchers documented each anomaly with plaster casts, photographs, and careful field notes, seeking patterns that might confirm the presence of an unknown mammal. Snow and ice preserved prints for hours or days, depending on the weather, but sudden storms could obliterate tracks in minutes. Camera traps were positioned along likely travel routes, though many were lost to avalanches or mechanical failure. Every effort required balancing caution and perseverance, as the Himalayas offered little margin for error while maintaining the integrity of the evidence. Blizzards and sudden storms frequently forced expeditions to retreat, demonstrating how extreme weather can erase traces and obscure even the most conspicuous signs of life. Whiteout conditions disoriented teams and obscured previously discovered tracks, leaving them to rely on compasses, GPS devices, and local guides. Hypothermia and frostbite were constant threats, and expeditions often had to wait for hours or days in shelters until the storm passed. The unpredictability of the environment mirrored the elusiveness of the creature itself, reinforcing the challenge of finding evidence in such a volatile landscape. Occasionally, investigators discovered unusually large prints, with impressions of toes and claw marks, along with broken branches bent at odd angles, yet no conclusive evidence ever followed. In some valleys, trails of footprints would vanish abruptly at cliff edges or into dense forests, offering tantalizing hints of the creature's presence while frustrating attempts at follow-up observation. Despite repeated casts and careful measurements, none matched known Himalayan wildlife precisely, leaving open the possibility that researchers were tracking something previously undocumented. Ecologists noted that certain remote valleys provided sufficient food sources and shelter to sustain a large omnivorous mammal, suggesting the region could theoretically support a hidden population. Areas rich in alpine shrubs, small mammals, and foraging opportunities could sustain a creature adapted to extreme cold and high altitudes. Seasonal migration patterns of bears, deer, and other mammals were studied to identify overlaps that might offer insight into the creature's movements. While speculative, these ecological considerations lent plausibility to the theory that an unknown species could persist undetected in such forbidding terrain. Seasonal glacial melt created hidden water sources and pockets of vegetation, forming microhabitats that could sustain elusive, large mammals even through the harshest winters. Researchers observed that small alpine streams, fed by melting glaciers, produced patches of greenery even in deep snow, attracting herbivores that could serve as prey or food for an unknown bipedal species. These microhabitats, often surrounded by cliffs and steep slopes, offered both sustenance and concealment. Ecologists noted that snow compaction patterns around these areas sometimes suggested the passage of unusually large creatures, though distinguishing them from bear tracks or avalanche snow was challenging. The presence of natural shelters such as rock overhangs and isolated caves further reinforced the possibility that a creature adapted to cold, rugged environments could persist largely undetected across multiple seasons. In recent decades, expedition teams have increasingly relied on high-resolution satellite imagery and thermal sensors to identify potential movement corridors across the snowbound landscape. By analysing heat signatures and terrain disturbances from above, researchers sought to detect the subtle imprints of an unknown species travelling between valleys or along ridgelines. Satellite images occasionally revealed elongated depressions in snowfields or clusters of disturbed vegetation, inconsistent with known wildlife patterns. Though these findings were often inconclusive and required ground verification, they added a technological layer to the decades-long search, complementing traditional tracking methods such as footprints and hair samples. This integration of remote sensing and fieldwork has allowed modern teams to target previously inaccessible locations, expanding the scope of observation while maintaining the suspense inherent to the Himalayas' hidden expanses. Debates among the teams were heated yet restrained. Some attributed sightings to misidentified Himalayan brown bears or snow leopards, while others acknowledged the enduring possibility of an unrecorded species. Skeptics argued that snow conditions, human imagination, and cultural storytelling could easily explain anomalies. Supporters cited the recurrence of tracks and vocalizations, as well as patterns in witness testimony, as evidence that conventional explanations were insufficient. This tension underscored the intersection of folklore, observation, and scientific rigor in documenting phenomena in extreme environments. Recent expeditions employ camera traps, drones, and environmental DNA collection in an attempt to capture definitive evidence, yet the mountains continue to guard their secrets with every snowdrift. Researchers strategically place devices near caves, ridgelines, and valleys known for historical sightings, hoping to detect movement or capture biological traces. Despite these technological advances, many cameras yield no images, and DNA samples remain inconclusive, suggesting the creature, if real, is capable of remaining entirely hidden from modern observation methods. As technology advances, the psychological and cultural weight of the Yeti legend endures, intertwining the tangible landscape with a persistent mystery. Local belief, mountaineer accounts, and historical records converge to form a narrative that is both scientifically intriguing and culturally resonant. The mountains themselves, imposing and indifferent, continue to challenge human perception, leaving each expedition to confront not only environmental hazards but the enduring unknown. Across snowbound ridges and silent valleys, the Himachal mountains conceal movements that no lens or footprint has yet fully revealed. The Nahanni Valley Reconnaissance, Canada. A sudden crack echoed through the canyon, drawing the expedition's attention to footprints pressed deep into the soft riverbank, larger and more elongated than any known wildlife could produce. The prints followed a winding course along the river's edge, interrupted only by occasional pools of water that seemed to distort their size and shape. Each impression suggested a creature of unusual height and mass, moving with deliberate caution yet leaving a trail that demanded recognition. The team paused, holding their breath as the wind carried the faint scent of disturbed earth and foliage. It was a reminder that in this remote landscape, observation could be fleeting and elusive. Alone on a narrow ridge above the swift current, the lead tracker felt the weight of isolation, each sound magnified by the stillness of the boreal forest. The forest canopy filtered the dim light of an overcast morning, creating pockets of shadow where movement could easily go unnoticed. Every snap of a branch, every distant call of a bird was scrutinized, measured against expectations of natural wildlife. Yet even with this heightened awareness, there was a sense that something larger, more deliberate, was observing them in turn. The valley's silence was deceptive, offering both calm and an ever-present tension that made every step tentative. Rain began to pour without warning, turning the steep trail into a slick hazard, forcing the team to navigate by instinct while their eyes scanned for any unusual movement. The downpour transformed the river into a torrent, eroding the banks and concealing footprints in the softened soil. Visibility shrank to a matter of meters, and yet the team pressed onward, aware that the most compelling evidence of an unknown presence could emerge when conditions were least forgiving. Each careful placement of a boot felt like a negotiation with an unseen adversary, a test of endurance as well as perception. Among fallen branches and disturbed undergrowth, a single tuft of dark hair clung stubbornly to a jagged root, offering a tantalizing clue that something elusive had passed that way. Its texture was coarse, unlike typical mammals known in the area, and the slight curl at the tip suggested it had endured exposure to wind and rain. Though no DNA testing could immediately confirm its origin, the hair became a focal point for discussion and documentation, a fragment of a larger puzzle that refused to yield clarity. It was evidence that was both mundane and extraordinary, a small token of mystery in a valley defined by its remoteness. Nearby, the team discovered a series of unusual depressions in soft soil, aligned in a pattern inconsistent with known wildlife, each surrounded by displaced stones and flattened vegetation, as if marking repeated passage or resting spots. Some impressions were deep enough to suggest a weight greater than an adult human, yet no signs of human activity had been recorded in these remote sections. Nearby trees bore faint claw-like marks at varying heights, hinting that the unknown presence may have used vertical surfaces to navigate or mark territory. Seasonal floods had partially obscured several of these sites, explaining why they had eluded documentation for decades. Collectively, these subtle traces strengthened the impression that something intelligent and elusive persisted in the valley. Local knowledge whispered of prior sightings, yet the team treated these anecdotes as context for their current observations, rather than unquestionable fact. Trappers spoke of a towering figure glimpsed along river bends. Indigenous guides described fleeting shapes moving among the trees at dusk. These recollections were carefully recorded, not as proof, but as patterns that might inform where to search next. The expedition respected this guidance while maintaining a cautious skepticism, aware that folklore could exaggerate or distort events, yet intrigued by the consistency of certain descriptions over decades. Repeated impressions in mud and soil, coupled with subtle disturbances in foliage, suggested a pattern of movement that defied simple explanation or coincidence. Trails appeared to lead to natural corridors through the forest, converging along riverbanks, steep slopes and sheltered overhangs. Footprints sometimes intersected with bear or moose tracks, but maintained a distinct stride and width, hinting at a bipedal gait. Broken twigs and displaced moss indicated deliberate navigation rather than random wandering. Collectively, these traces painted a picture of an intelligent, adaptable being capable of moving silently across the valley for extended periods. The presence of elk, moose and bears offered a baseline for natural activity, yet anomalies in tracks and broken vegetation hinted at a larger, unidentified presence. Researchers noted that some areas exhibited repeated disturbances without corresponding animal evidence, suggesting a creature either unusually cautious or unknown to regional wildlife catalogues. Observations of deer scattering without an apparent predator and of birds abruptly taking flight lent additional weight to the sense of an unseen watcher. Ecologists considered these indirect signs as potential indicators of a large omnivorous species capable of surviving in isolation, though such interpretations remained speculative. Twilight brought fleeting shadows between the trees, a glimpse that vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving the searchers to question whether they had seen reality or imagination. The low sun cast elongated silhouettes, blending natural shapes with the imagination heightened by exhaustion and anticipation. Even experienced trackers struggled to distinguish subtle cues in the dimming light. Every movement suggested presence, every silence hinted at the absence. This interplay of perception and uncertainty defined the daily rhythm of reconnaissance in the Nahanni, where moments of potential discovery were often indistinguishable from misperception. Drones hovered above the treetops while thermal sensors swept the valley floor, capturing only intermittent heat signatures that could never be confirmed as the creature itself. These tools offered a modern advantage, allowing observation without intrusion, yet they also revealed the limitations of technology in dense forests and deep canyons. Heat signatures often reflected wind, sun-warmed rocks, or wildlife, demanding careful analysis and repeated verification. Despite these constraints, the incorporation of aerial and infrared monitoring expanded the investigative reach, enabling the team to probe areas inaccessible on foot while maintaining the tension and uncertainty of the search. A low, guttural call resonated from the canyon below, unidentifiable and chilling, prompting the team to freeze mid-step as they scanned every darkened recess. The sound carried across the valley, unnatural in tone and volume, breaking the monotony of wind and water. It prompted immediate questions about species identification, source and proximity. While some members suggested echoes of wildlife or geological phenomena, the resonance was unlike anything routinely documented. Instruments recorded the vibration, yet interpretation remained ambiguous, adding a layer of both excitement and unease to the ongoing reconnaissance. Tension arose among the expedition, as one member attributed the findings to bears or human error, while another insisted the evidence suggested something extraordinary, lurking just out of reach. Field notes captured arguments over footprints, hair samples and auditory phenomena, reflecting the persistent tension between empirical caution and imaginative inference. These discussions shaped daily strategies, influencing where to set observation posts, which river bends to patrol, and how to interpret recurring anomalies. Skepticism and open-minded inquiry coexisted uneasily, reinforcing the valley's capacity to challenge conventional assumptions about wildlife and presence. The psychological toll of prolonged isolation, coupled with repeated brushes with the unexplained, left the team contemplating the enduring allure of the unknown. Nights in remote camps brought heightened awareness, where the rustle of small animals could suggest something far larger, and shadows shifted in ways that provoked constant vigilance. Journal entries described the tension between rational analysis and instinctive fear, illustrating how human perception bends under prolonged exposure to ambiguity. The valley's silence became both companion and adversary, shaping not only the expedition's observations, but also their understanding of what might exist beyond confirmation. Every trail, every disturbed patch of forest seemed to whisper the valley's secrets, yet definitive proof of the creature remained frustratingly beyond grasp. Footprints faded with rain, hair samples resisted clear identification, and thermal signatures proved inconclusive. The interplay of observation, evidence, and interpretation created a continuous cycle of hope and uncertainty. Yet in these moments, the Nahanni Valley asserted itself as a place where the boundary between known and unknown remained fluid, challenging investigators to accept the limits of certainty while pursuing the tantalizing possibility of discovery. In the deep canyons and shadowed forests of the Nahanni, a presence persists, glimpsed only through fleeting signs that vanish before comprehension can take hold. The Lake Van Abyss Project, Turkey. A flicker on the sonar screen drew the team's gaze, an irregular shape moving with deliberate motion beneath the dark waters of Lake Van. Instruments pinged and echoed across the abyss, registering movement that seemed inconsistent with known aquatic life. Even experienced submersible pilots felt a sudden tension, aware that what they were observing might belong to a class of creatures entirely undocumented. As the submersible glided over the blackened depths, every shadow, every slight rise in sediment became a potential clue, heightening the sense that the lake's stillness was far from empty. The lake itself seemed almost alien, its high salinity and alkaline waters preserving silence and isolating the depths from surface disturbances. Covering over 3,700 square kilometers, Lake Van reaches depths of nearly 450 meters, creating a volume of water isolated from surrounding rivers and streams. Its extreme pH and mineral content shape both flora and fauna, restricting the ecosystem to highly specialized species. For the expedition, these factors presented both opportunity and challenge. The lake's conditions might support a creature adapted to extremes, yet the same conditions hindered the performance of sensitive equipment, complicating observation. Historical records hinted at unusual aquatic sightings, with local fishermen recounting strange ripples and shadows that appeared without discernible cause. Elders spoke of shapes moving silently beneath fishing nets, sometimes forcing nets to tear or fish to scatter. Written reports from regional archives described similar disturbances, often dismissed as superstition or misidentification of known species. Still, the consistency of descriptions over decades, coupled with rare photographs of fleeting shadows, provided enough reason for the scientific community to investigate the depths systematically. Submersibles and remote-operated vehicles were prepared with meticulous care, their sensors calibrated to detect even subtle anomalies in water density or movement. Engineers adjusted sonar sensitivity to filter out background noise, while cameras capable of low-light capture scanned the depths for visual confirmation. Teams rehearsed navigation routines over mapped sections of the lake to reduce the risk of collision with submerged rock formations. Each deployment demanded precision. Failure could result in the loss of both equipment and crucial data, highlighting the unforgiving nature of underwater exploration. Initial passes revealed only faint disturbances, sediment clouds that rose and dissipated as though stirred by something neither wind nor known currents could explain. Shadows shifted unpredictably, sometimes appearing to move with intent, sometimes dissolving into the lake's darkness. The team documented these anomalies meticulously, measuring current velocity, water temperature, and mineral density, seeking correlations that might indicate the presence of a large organism. Despite careful tracking, no image captured the creature directly, leaving interpretation reliant on patterns of movement and environmental disruption. Known species in Lake Van, from endemic fish to invertebrates adapted to high alkalinity, offered context for interpreting the unusual activity recorded on instruments. Researchers catalogued behavioral patterns, noting schooling tendencies, nocturnal movements, and sediment interactions. Comparisons revealed that the anomalies did not conform to any documented species, either in size or in the deliberate displacement of sediment. Biologists hypothesized that if a large organism existed, it would require exceptional adaptation to survive in the lake's chemically hostile environment. Geologists and biologists noted deep underwater caves and fissures along the lake bed, formations rarely explored and potentially large enough to conceal substantial life forms. These structures were shaped by tectonic activity along the East Anatolian Fault, creating complex channels, overhangs, and voids that disrupted sonar readings and masked ordinary currents. Submersible probes revealed uneven terrain within these caves, with sediment pockets and rock overhangs that could obscure any large organism from view. Such environments provided potential refuges, allowing a creature to move undetected while offering protection from surface disturbances and extreme water conditions. Water chemistry readings revealed localized pockets of reduced oxygen and unusual mineral deposits, conditions that might challenge most known species but could be exploited by a highly specialized organism. Vertical profiling with CTD sensors recorded variations in temperature, salinity, and pH, highlighting microhabitats isolated from the main water column. Interestingly, several of these chemically distinct zones corresponded with previously recorded sonar anomalies, suggesting a possible link between environmental extremes and the presence of an elusive creature. These conditions hinted that survival in Lake Van's depths might depend on adaptations invisible to conventional observation. Underwater currents shifted unpredictably around submerged cliffs, forcing the expedition to navigate with constant adjustments and heightened attention to the instruments. Thermoclines and mineral layers created pockets of resistance, which occasionally masked or exaggerated sonar readings. Pilots noted sudden jolts as submersibles passed over uneven terrain, and small faults in the lakebed created natural turbulence, adding to the difficulty of interpreting subtle movements. The interaction of technology and environment emphasized how elusive a creature could remain even under intense scrutiny. Crew members reported a growing tension as hours passed in confined submersibles, the darkness pressing against both sight and imagination. Isolation deepened the psychological strain, and minor anomalies could be magnified by the mind's inclination toward pattern recognition. Journal entries from pilots and scientists described a balance between disciplined observation and the creeping awareness that the lake might conceal a form of life far outside current understanding. The tension became both a tool and a challenge, sharpening attention while increasing the likelihood of misinterpreting subtle environmental cues. Repeated sonar readings suggested a pattern, a slow, deliberate movement across the abyss that defied the behavior of known aquatic species. Analysts traced these signals across multiple dives, mapping their courses relative to submerged geological features. The trajectories were neither linear nor random, implying navigation guided by an awareness of obstacles and currents. Though the evidence remained indirect, the consistency of these patterns convinced the team that an intelligent, adaptive presence might occupy the lake, capable of evading detection while maintaining regular movement within defined ranges. Arguments flared among the scientists, with some insisting on natural explanations while others considered the possibility of an unknown, highly elusive aquatic creature. Hypotheses ranged from unrecognized fish species to the remnants of prehistoric fauna, yet no known biology matched the scale and behavior implied by the observations. Discussions extended into the night, with submersible pilots recounting subtle sensory cues and sediment anomalies, creating a growing divide between cautious interpretation and speculative inference. The unresolved tension fueled the expedition's drive, balancing empirical rigor with the allure of discovery. A sudden surge of displaced water caused instruments to spike, revealing a mass far larger than any recorded fish, gliding just beyond the submersible's camera range. The brief disturbance lasted only moments, yet the data suggested a creature of considerable bulk, moving with purposeful velocity. Instruments captured the rise and fall of sediment clouds, the bending of sonar reflections, and shifts in temperature gradients that could not be attributed to environmental factors alone. Even without visual confirmation, the crew acknowledged that something remarkable had passed nearby, altering the water and the team's understanding of the lake's possibilities. Attempts to capture photographic or physical evidence yielded only partial sediment samples and fleeting shadows, leaving the anomaly frustratingly unconfirmed. Samples were analysed for biological markers, yet results provided inconclusive information. No DNA could definitively attribute the disturbances to a single organism. Camera footage revealed fleeting shapes obscured by darkness and particulate matter, reinforcing the sense that the creature could navigate with agility and discretion. Each failed attempt emphasized both the challenges of deep lake exploration and the persistence of a presence that seemed aware of human observation. As the expedition concluded for the day, reflections on technology, perception, and the limits of human observation underscored the persistent mystery of the deep. The team recorded meticulous logs, noting patterns in sediment disturbance, anomalies in sonar readings, and subtle correlations with water chemistry. Analysts acknowledged that even with modern equipment, the lake resisted certainty, leaving the question of the creature's existence unresolved. In this tension between knowledge and the unknown, the depths of Lake Van maintained their silent dominion, At the bottom of the cold, alkaline depths of Lake Van, something stirs in silence, defying detection yet refusing to be ignored. The Congo Basin Ape Expedition, Democratic Republic of the Congo. The air hung heavy with humidity, and every footstep threatened to crush a hidden world beneath a thick carpet of leaves, as the unknown ape's presence seemed to echo silently through the forest. The team advanced slowly, machetes parting vines while eyes searched for signs of movement beyond the human eye. Reports of a massive, upright creature had drawn scientists into the heart of one of the planet's most complex rainforests, where visibility was limited and the line between legend and observation blurred. The forest itself seemed alive, each rustle a potential clue, each shadow a possibility, and the explorers were acutely aware that the jungle could conceal the extraordinary. Sunlight barely pierced the dense canopy, leaving the undergrowth cloaked in perpetual twilight, where rivers twisted through the green tangle, and the forest floor teemed with life both seen and unseen. Layers of foliage created shifting textures of light and shadow, and the constant drone of insects formed a persistent soundtrack to the expedition. Monkeys called overhead, while the faint splash of fish in river eddies reminded the team of the forest's intricate ecosystem. Navigating required both patience and instinct, as the unknown ape's elusive movements could easily be missed amid the riot of sensory input. Local villagers recounted encounters that blurred the line between folklore and observation, describing tall, powerful figures glimpsed fleetingly at dawn or dusk, leaving footprints larger than any known primate. Some spoke of hearing guttural calls reverberating across river valleys, or discovering fruit stripped clean in patterns unlike those of chimpanzees or gorillas. Anthropologists accompanying the expedition gathered these oral histories carefully, noting consistency in size estimates, gait descriptions, and behavioral traits across multiple communities. Even when stories seemed fantastical, the repeated details suggested a phenomenon worth investigating with scientific rigor. The expedition team prepared meticulously, equipping themselves with machetes, GPS trackers, camera traps, and night vision scopes, aware that navigating the labyrinthine jungle demanded both caution and endurance. Supplies were carefully rationed for extended stays, and all movement was mapped against satellite imagery and historical trail data to minimize risk. Teams worked in small units, moving quietly to avoid startling wildlife and potentially alerting the unknown ape. Each member was trained to observe minute details, broken branches, partially eaten vegetation, or subtle footprints that could betray the presence of an unseen primate. Early reconnaissance revealed broken branches, unusual scratch marks on tree trunks, and partially eaten fruit in patterns inconsistent with known primates, hinting at a creature both large and intelligent. Measurements of claw and hand impressions suggested strength and dexterity, beyond what was typical for local gorilla populations. Some markings were positioned at heights difficult for ordinary primates to reach, implying either extraordinary vertical reach or upright movement across the forest floor. These initial signs fueled cautious excitement, prompting the team to extend their observational radius deeper into the rainforest. Canopy observations revealed unusually large nests high in the trees, constructed in patterns distinct from gorillas or chimpanzees, suggesting either size, strength, or intelligence beyond known species. Some nests were positioned over river bends or cliff edges, areas typically avoided by ordinary primates, implying careful site selection. Field notes recorded measurements of branch thickness and nest diameter, which exceeded known standards for local apes. The arrangement and construction techniques hinted at planning and adaptability, suggesting that the unknown creature may have developed sophisticated strategies to navigate and inhabit its complex environment. The team documented unusually large vocal resonances echoing through the forest, low-frequency calls that travelled farther than any known ape in the region. Acoustic measurements captured using parabolic microphones revealed tonal patterns distinct from gorilla or chimpanzee vocalizations. Some calls appeared to respond to distant noises, implying territorial awareness or even coordinated communication. Observers also noted that local wildlife reacted to these sounds, monkeys froze mid-climb, birds scattered, and predators paused, highlighting the call's ecological impact and hinting at a creature capable of influencing its surroundings without being directly seen. Strange vocalizations echoed through the dense undergrowth, low guttural sounds interspersed with higher calls, compelling the team to consider whether an unknown species was communicating across its territory. Acoustic specialists recorded these calls using hydrophones and parabolic microphones, analyzing patterns for repetition, pitch, and sequence. The sounds bore no close resemblance to documented chimpanzee, gorilla, or monkey calls in the region. Occasionally, responses seemed to echo the team's own movements, suggesting a level of attentiveness that deepened both curiosity and unease. Flooded paths and hidden swamp areas forced researchers to adapt continually, while predatory animals and insects tested both skill and patience in a jungle that tolerated no mistakes. Crossing the waterlogged lowlands required wading through waist-deep channels and balancing on submerged logs, all while avoiding venomous snakes and insects carrying tropical diseases. These challenges slowed progress, making each sign of the unknown ape, a footprint, a bent branch, or a sudden rustle, more significant. The environment itself acted as a filter, allowing only the most resilient observers to follow the traces without disturbing them. Camera traps captured brief flashes of movement and silhouettes darting between trees, yet every potential image dissolved into shadow and foliage before clear identification could occur. Some frames showed large shapes partially obscured by leaves, while others revealed nothing more than disturbed vegetation. Night vision scopes occasionally picked up reflective eyes, then lost them moments later in dense undergrowth. Each ambiguous recording was catalogued meticulously, compared across locations and time, and stored as part of an extensive database that could reveal patterns only after months of analysis. Broken vegetation and footprints revealed repeated patterns suggesting purposeful movement, as if the creature possessed an understanding of human presence and actively avoided it. Paths frequently led away from high-traffic areas, and the spacing of footprints implied awareness of observers' positions. Some impressions appeared near river crossings but never lingered in open areas, hinting at a strategy to minimize exposure. Analysts speculated that such intelligence indicated not only physical capability, but also behavioral sophistication, uncommon among known regional primates. Disagreement among scientists grew, some arguing for misidentification or exaggeration, others convinced that the combination of traces and sounds indicated a previously undocumented primate. Field notes reveal ongoing discussions over whether anomalies could be explained by known species, environmental interference, or observer bias. Ethologists pointed to subtle behaviours inconsistent with gorilla or chimpanzee activity, while skeptics cautioned that confirmation required direct observation or DNA evidence. This tension drove further exploration, pushing the team to refine methods for capturing clear evidence without disturbing potential habitats. A sudden rustle just beyond the team's line of sight revealed a fleeting figure, massive yet agile, disappearing into thick vines before a single photograph could be taken. The movement was deliberate, with a sway and stride that matched multiple eyewitness reports. Heart rates spiked, but the sub-team maintained composure, recording detailed notes on direction, speed, and estimated size. Though the sighting lasted mere seconds, it confirmed that the unknown ape's presence was real and not purely anecdotal, reinforcing the urgency and intrigue of the expedition. Review of footprint casts, territorial markings, and fruit remains offered tantalizing hints of behavior and diet, yet collectively these clues refused to confirm the creature's full nature. The team noted dietary adaptations to hard nuts and fibrous vegetation, suggesting specialized dentition or jaw strength. Footprints implied both weight-bearing and climbing capabilities, hinting at versatility and movement across the forest. Yet no single piece of evidence allowed researchers to draw a full biological or taxonomic conclusion, leaving the mystery intact and compelling further study. Exhausted and isolated, the expedition reflected on the limits of human perception within the endless green maze, acknowledging both the knowledge gained and the persistent unknown. Days of laborious tracking had produced hundreds of indirect clues, yet the creature remained elusive, almost as if intentionally concealing itself. Team members documented every observation, aware that future analyses might reveal connections invisible in real time. The forest, in all its dense complexity, resisted certainty, preserving the enigmatic figure for those patient and perceptive enough to follow its traces. Within the shadowed reaches of the Congo Basin, an unseen presence moves with a deliberate intelligence that has evaded human understanding for generations. The Nandi Hills Night Survey, Kenya. The first night in the Nandi Hills brought a chilling hush, broken only by distant rustlings that hinted at a large, unseen presence moving through the undergrowth. The hills, rolling and shrouded in moonlight, seemed to hold their breath, and every step the team took disturbed the forest floor with soft crackles that echoed unnervingly. Locals had long whispered of a nocturnal creature, larger than any known primate or feline, appearing only under the cover of darkness. Each rustle, each glimmer between branches was scrutinized, as the researchers quickly realized that in the hills after sunset, even the familiar could become alien. Fog rolled over the valleys, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and the subtle, unfamiliar aroma of animal activity, sharpening the team's awareness with every inhale. Moisture clung to the leaves, beads forming along thorny shrubs, while the distant chorus of insects punctuated the silence with unpredictable rhythm. Occasionally the sound of running water from hidden streams punctuated the night, masking and distorting more subtle movements. This sensory complexity forced the team to rely not only on sight, but on sound, scent, and instinct, each sense intertwined in a delicate dance of observation and patience. Equipped with night vision goggles, thermal cameras, and directional microphones, the researchers prepared for the unpredictable demands of nocturnal tracking in terrain that tested both endurance and patience. Each member was assigned specific tasks, some monitoring thermal feeds for unexpected heat signatures, others scanning the forest floor for footprints or disturbed foliage. GPS units were set to map every route, while audio recorders captured ambient sound continuously. The team's goal was methodical: gather evidence without disturbing the creature, preserving both its habitat and the integrity of their observations, knowing that every misstep could erase critical clues. Footprints partially obscured by fallen leaves and soft soil marked the beginning of the survey, suggesting a creature of notable size and strength, navigating the hills under cover of darkness. The impressions were deeper than those of known wildlife, with elongated toes and an unusual stride that hinted at upright locomotion at times. Measurements were taken with compasses and measuring tapes, photographs catalogued, and sketches made for comparison with historical sightings. While some footprints intersected paths used by leopards or baboons, others diverged into unbroken forest, leaving questions about the creature's habits and range. Birds and smaller mammals reacted with unusual alarm, scattering into the shadows, a pattern the team began to map as a potential indicator of the creature's presence. Frogs croaked in irregular bursts, and small monkeys froze mid-leap before retreating into denser canopy. Predators like genets or civets paused or altered hunting paths when the team moved through open glades. By observing these reactions over several nights, researchers identified zones of heightened activity suggesting that the creature influenced its environment without being directly observed, using the natural rhythms of nocturnal wildlife to its advantage. Slopes steeped in darkness, hidden caves and winding rivers challenged movement, forcing careful planning for each step and every observation conducted under the night sky. Certain valleys were accessible only by narrow trails bordered with slippery moss, while cliff edges demanded balance and caution, particularly when carrying equipment. Streams swelled after nighttime rain, creating temporary barriers that the team had to cross carefully. The terrain itself became an obstacle and a filter, ensuring that only careful, persistent observers could document the subtle signs left behind by the unknown nocturnal entity. From time to time, faint glimmers of reflective eyeshine caught the team's attention, fleeting and irregular, as if watching from the underbrush without revealing form or intent. Observers noted that these reflections were larger and differently positioned than those of known nocturnal animals like bushbucks or civets. Attempts to illuminate the eyes with torchlight or night vision caused no movement or retreat, suggesting a deliberate avoidance strategy. The team documented each sighting with detailed notes, cross-referencing location, angle, and distance to discern whether they were witnessing a single individual, multiple creatures, or a recurring pattern of presence. Low, resonant calls occasionally pierced the silence, recorded on sensitive audio equipment, their cadence and depth unlike any known local primate or predator. The tones were pitched lower than baboon or vervet monkey vocalizations, resonating across multiple ridges and valleys. On some nights, the calls were followed by distant responses, as if another creature answered in kind. Or perhaps a single individual was moving through the hills, repeating its sounds to gauge its surroundings. Acoustic specialists later analysed these recordings, noting the unique patterns that did not match any catalogued species in the region. A fleeting thermal signature flickered between trees, vanishing before full confirmation, leaving only the suggestion of deliberate, intelligent motion through the dense foliage. Observers held their breath, scanning the hillside with night vision goggles, catching only a sudden heat glow behind twisted branches. The moment passed in seconds, yet its implications were profound. A large-bodied creature navigating the forest with skill and awareness of human presence. These ephemeral sightings became the most tantalizing evidence, encouraging the team to remain alert and patient through subsequent nights. Branches snapped and foliage bent in ways that hinted at both weight and intentionality, prompting detailed sketches and photographs for later comparison. Some broken branches were positioned at heights that exceeded the reach of known local primates, while others seemed deliberately placed to obscure movement or conceal resting spots. Fruit was stripped from trees in patterns inconsistent with known feeding behaviour, leaving behind a trail that required careful documentation. Each subtle alteration in the forest was treated as a possible signature of the creature, evidence that, though indirect, hinted at intelligence and adaptability. Contention grew among the researchers, some attributing anomalies to misperception in darkness, while others insisted that the patterns indicated an extraordinary, unexplored species. The psychological strain of night observations, combined with fatigue, made interpretation challenging. Team meetings often involved reviewing recordings, photographs, and field notes to identify potential human error or optical illusions. Yet, even skeptical members admitted that the consistency of evidence over multiple nights could not be entirely dismissed, leading to cautious acknowledgement of the possibility that the unknown creature was real and highly elusive. Fatigue and heightened senses combined to warp perception, each shadow and sound magnified, testing the team's focus and their ability to differentiate between imagination and reality. Eyes adjusted and readjusted to moonlight and night vision screens, while ears strained to interpret rustles or distant calls. Sleep-deprived minds became sensitive to patterns that might otherwise go unnoticed, but this heightened perception also risked false positives. The team had to balance acute awareness with rational analysis, ensuring that the line between evidence and conjecture remained clear despite the disorienting environment. Over many nights of observation, clusters of movement and signs suggested a home range or regular travel paths through the hills, hinting at behavioural consistency. Certain slopes and valleys were frequented repeatedly, while other areas remained untouched, indicating selective travel or habitation. Researchers mapped these patterns, noting correlations with water sources, fruit-bearing trees, and sheltering caves. Such data, though indirect, allowed the team to form preliminary hypotheses about the creature's daily habits, feeding routines, and territorial awareness, while leaving its identity unresolved. Despite meticulous documentation, the forest remained enigmatic, with every discovery prompting more questions than answers, emphasizing the limits of human perception in nocturnal landscapes. Footprints ended abruptly, sounds faded without a trace, and fleeting thermal images left only impressions of presence. Even after weeks of observation, no clear photograph or capture was possible, and the unknown creature's behavior continued to defy easy categorization. The Nandi Hills at night preserved the mystery, a living environment where glimpses, echoes, and traces told a story that human senses could grasp only partially. Under the pale moonlight of the Nandi Hills, an unseen figure navigates the darkness with a purpose that defies explanation and leaves even the most experienced observers unsettled. The Namib Skeleton Coast Recon Mission, Namibia. Morning fog rolled across the skeleton coast, concealing jagged cliffs and ancient shipwrecks, while whispers of an unknown, massive creature stirred among the dunes. The fog swirled with an almost sentient quality, blurring horizons and muffling the roar of distant waves. Local fishermen and coastal herders spoke of a hulking presence emerging only when visibility was low, a figure that left no trace beyond fleeting impressions in sand and occasional disturbances of the shoreline's fragile ecosystem. As the expedition team arrived, they felt the weight of history pressing on their shoulders, aware that the skeleton coast had long been a theatre for unexplained events. Wind-driven sands shifted ceaselessly, reshaping footprints and erasing signs of passage almost as quickly as they appeared, challenging the expedition's efforts to track anything reliably. Every ridge and hollow seemed transient, formed one moment and gone the next, making permanent observation nearly impossible. Even freshly discovered depressions from local wildlife were distorted in hours, and the team quickly learned that patience and repeated visits were essential for mapping consistent patterns. Instruments were deployed to record subtle sand movement, while researchers took meticulous notes, knowing that the desert itself was as much a participant in the expedition as any living creature. The team assembled along a narrow coastal strip, equipped with tide charts, long-range binoculars, and specialized sensors designed for both sand and sea monitoring. Each member carried a dual set of responsibilities. Some focused on terrestrial tracking, combing the dunes for footprints or disturbed vegetation, while others monitored the shallow surf and cliffs for unusual silhouettes or motion. The expedition relied on early morning low tides to examine stretches of beach normally submerged, seeking anomalies in rock pools, driftwood, and tidal debris. Every approach was calibrated to maximize observation potential, while leaving minimal impact on the fragile coastal environment. Near a cluster of seal colonies, impressions in the damp sand suggested movement too large and deliberate to belong to any known predator in the region. Footprints were elongated and wide, with irregular spacing that implied a gait distinct from jackals or leopards. Some impressions appeared to indicate partial upright locomotion, though intermittent quadrupedal prints suggested versatility in movement. The team carefully photographed each impression, noting depth, stride, and orientation, creating a detailed catalogue for later analysis. The juxtaposition of large tracks near small animal colonies heightened tension, hinting at both stealth and predatory sophistication. Seabirds reacted with sudden alarm, swooping and calling in ways that indicated unseen disturbances, while jackals and foxes altered their usual patrols across the dunes. By observing these reactions over several nights, the researchers began to identify zones of frequent movement, with repeated disturbances forming subtle patterns in otherwise undisturbed sand. Even the behaviour of tiny insects and crabs, normally indifferent to passing humans, seemed affected, scattering from specific areas in a way that hinted at the creature's passage. These observations reinforced the notion that its presence was deliberate and consistent, rather than random or coincidental. Scattered shipwrecks and rusted hulls provided both historical context and potential shelters for the creature, their presence woven into local maritime lore as points of mystery. Some wrecks dated back centuries, their skeletal remains mingling with driftwood and desert sand, creating labyrinthine zones of concealment. Researchers speculated that the unknown creature could exploit these structures for temporary refuge or ambush vantage points, using natural camouflage against human detection. The team meticulously mapped each wreck, noting proximity to tracks and animal disturbances, forming an integrated environmental picture to guide their search. Amid the shifting sands and fog-laden coves, the team discovered clusters of unusually large claw-marked boulders and eroded dunes, suggesting repeated pressure or scratching by a creature far exceeding the size of known local predators. These marks were often found near water pools formed by rare inland streams or seasonal rainfall, locations that could provide hydration in an otherwise arid environment. Geological analysis confirmed the impressions were not caused by erosion or sediment collapse, while comparisons with known animal traces ruled out leopards, hyenas, and jackals. The persistence and regularity of these markings hinted at habitual behaviour, offering a rare glimpse into how the creature might navigate and interact with its harsh surroundings. A fleeting shape appeared at the crest of a dune, silhouetted against the pale light, vanishing before observation could confirm its form or direction. Thermal cameras recorded only a momentary anomaly, a faint heat signature indistinguishable from shifting sunlight on sand, leaving the observers questioning whether they had glimpsed the creature or imagined it entirely. Still, the sighting invigorated the team, affirming the possibility that persistent, careful observation could yield tangible evidence. Repeated scanning from elevated vantage points became a nightly routine, with each dawn bringing a renewed sense of anticipation. Occasional low growls or unidentifiable sounds drifted from cliffside gullies, blending with the roar of waves, leaving the team uncertain whether they were witnessing a natural or unknown phenomenon. Acoustic sensors captured resonances that did not match recorded vocalizations of local mammals or birds. Specialists analyzing the data later noted tonal qualities and cadence inconsistent with any documented species in southern Africa. Such evidence was subtle but compelling, adding an auditory dimension to a predominantly visual investigation and reinforcing the idea of an intelligent, adaptive presence moving along the coast. Tracks intersected scavenged remains of seals and fish, with disturbance patterns hinting at intentional repeated interaction rather than random predation. The team documented partially consumed carcasses and discarded shells, noting feeding strategies that suggested selective consumption. Certain tracks circled clusters of prey repeatedly, indicating planning or habitual paths rather than opportunistic feeding. Researchers compared patterns over multiple nights, finding evidence of both territorial behaviour and repeated visitation of specific feeding grounds, suggesting a creature familiar with local wildlife and capable of nuanced interaction with its environment. Expedition members debated the significance of these findings, some arguing for environmental misinterpretation, while others insisted the consistency suggested a single, intelligent presence. Field meetings were intense, with maps spread across sand or portable tables, researchers pointing to overlapping observations and analysing thermal footage, footprints and sound recordings. Divergent interpretations were expected. The team weighed the possibility of misreading natural processes against the compelling alignment of multiple indicators. Ultimately, these discussions strengthened methodology, refining strategies for observation and reducing the chance of misattributing phenomena to human error. Harsh sunlight and sudden gusts forced careful navigation across the sands, with dehydration and shifting terrain reminding the team of the Skeleton Coast's relentless dangers. Protective clothing, sun shields, and scheduled hydration became essential routines, particularly when traversing dunes above exposed cliffs. The interplay of heat, fog, and wind not only complicated the search, but also created mirages and distortions, requiring the team to cross-verify every sighting and track. The desert demanded vigilance, forcing a blend of endurance, scientific rigour, and adaptive intuition to pursue the unknown creature through such unforgiving terrain. Mapping the multiple nights of observation revealed recurring paths along dunes and cliffs, suggesting habitual routes used by the creature along the fog-bound coastline. Certain coves and tidal flats appeared favoured, perhaps for shelter or hunting, while other stretches remained untouched, forming distinct movement corridors. The team integrated these findings with historical accounts from local communities and maritime records, noting a pattern of sightings spanning decades. Though elusive, the creature's traces indicated intelligence, persistence, and an ability to exploit the complex interplay of desert and ocean along this remote coast. Despite the ephemeral nature of footprints and fleeting sightings, the Skeleton Coast remained both witness and accomplice, keeping the unknown creature just beyond full comprehension. The dunes, cliffs, and tidal flats preserved a puzzle of sand and shadow, tracks and disturbances, hinting at a life form moving with both stealth and intent. Every encounter, no matter how brief or indirect, emphasized the gulf between human observation and the adaptability of a being perfectly attuned to one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth. With each ebbing tide, traces disappear into the sand, yet the sense of something deliberate moving along the Skeleton Coast lingers, refusing to fade from memory. The Yunnan Highlands Primate Search. China. Tucked within the steep terraces of Yunnan, reports of an unusually large primate have persisted among villagers for decades, described as swift, cautious, and nearly silent in its movements. Accounts vary, some referring to a bipedal gait while others describe powerful leaping between bamboo groves, yet all emphasize a deliberate avoidance of human presence. The local press rarely mentioned these stories, but provincial officials occasionally filed reports after shepherds or farmers reported missing livestock or fleeting sightings. Scientific interest emerged in the 1980s when ethnographers began documenting oral histories that described a creature larger than the region's known macaques, possessing intelligence and social behaviour beyond typical wildlife. Mist rises from the river valleys at dawn, revealing a mosaic of bamboo thickets, terraced fields, and dense subtropical forests that challenge even the most experienced trackers. Slopes alternate between precipitous cliffs and gentle terraces, each harbouring microhabitats that can obscure movement for days at a time. The interplay of fog, shifting sunlight, and dense vegetation created natural camouflage, rendering the highlands a maze of hidden pathways and vantage points. Seasonal rainfall adds another layer of complexity, swelling rivers and loosening soil, further complicating observation. Explorers quickly realised that terrain itself was an active participant, shaping both the creature's behaviour and the strategies required to follow it. Local elders recount glimpses of a shadowy figure leaping between bamboo clumps, often accompanied by guttural calls that are unlike any known regional primate. These narratives, collected over decades, describe the creature as both intelligent and elusive, appearing during early morning or late evening when human activity is minimal. Villagers insist it avoids settlements deliberately, yet they speak of moments when it seemed to observe them silently, lingering near fields or paths without revealing its full form. The consistency of these accounts across multiple villages lends credibility to the claims, suggesting a pattern rather than isolated folklore. Navigating narrow ridges and slippery slopes, the expedition carries motion-sensitive cameras, audio recorders, and compact climbing gear designed for the highland terrain. Teams often travelled before dawn, relying on local guides familiar with hidden streams, bamboo clusters, and steep gullies that could easily conceal a primate's passage. Their efforts were painstaking, moving slowly to minimise disturbance while scanning for any sign of movement or tracks. Even minor sounds, a snapping twig, the rustle of leaves, could trigger a momentary pause as investigators attempted to discern whether the source was human, animal, or the unknown primate itself. Footprints discovered in soft soil along hidden streams suggest a creature with longer toes and a broader gait than any documented macaque or gibbon in the region. Casts and measurements indicated foot lengths exceeding 40 centimetres in some cases, with a pronounced arch and distinct pressure patterns that hinted at significant weight and deliberate step placement. Investigators noted that prints appeared in areas with minimal human traffic, often near fruit-bearing trees or water sources, suggesting calculated foraging routes. Comparison with zoological records confirmed that no known species native to Yunnan could account for the size and distribution of these impressions. At night, the forest echoes with unfamiliar vocalizations, low resonant grunts and intermittent whoops that defy immediate identification and hint at intelligence. Audio analysis reveals patterns distinct from known primates, with variations in pitch and duration that suggest communication beyond simple alarm calls. The sounds often coincide with areas of recent footprint activity, reinforcing the impression of an aware and mobile presence. Expedition members frequently stayed silent for hours, recording these nocturnal calls and observing the faint rustle of bamboo, as if something large and intelligent moved just beyond sight. Camera traps positioned near fruiting trees occasionally capture fleeting images, dark shapes darting between trunks, glimpses too brief for definitive identification, but consistent in size and posture. Frames reveal long limbs and muscular torsos, often obscured by shadow or foliage. In some instances, two individuals appear in the same frame, hinting at social behaviour and suggesting that sightings might not be of a solitary animal. While inconclusive as photographic proof, these images provide valuable clues about movement patterns, preferred terrain, and times of activity. Unexpectedly, researchers discovered small, intricately woven nests high in the bamboo canopy, seemingly crafted with precision and unusually large for any documented macaque or gibbon species. These structures, composed of intertwined branches and leaves, appeared regularly along steep ridges and near feeding sites, suggesting a degree of planning and spatial awareness previously unrecorded for known regional primates. Careful measurements indicated that the nests could support significant weight, implying the creature's size and strength. The placement of these nests also reflected an understanding of predator avoidance and environmental stability, hinting at complex behaviour patterns beyond casual shelter construction. Sources from provincial archives describe similar sightings over the past century, often linked to areas where bamboo and broadleaf forests intersect, suggesting continuity of presence. Early anthropological reports and missionary journals mention wild men in the highlands, often described as shy bipedal figures observed at dawn. Scholars cross-reference these sources with village accounts and topographical maps, identifying recurring locations where the creature might persist. This historical layer adds depth to contemporary investigations, revealing a long-standing thread of mystery that has eluded systematic documentation. Study of feeding traces shows partially stripped bamboo stalks and scattered wild fruit, indicating dietary habits that blend known primate behaviour with unexplained anomalies. Certain feeding sites display repeated patterns, bamboo peeled at specific heights, fruit selectively consumed, and evidence of climbing structures utilised in a way atypical for macaques. This behaviour suggests cognitive flexibility, potentially reflecting problem-solving skills, spatial awareness, and environmental adaptation. These subtle clues reinforce the idea of an intelligent creature operating deliberately within a complex ecosystem. Monsoon rains transform narrow paths into mud-choked channels, forcing trackers to improvise and revealing how environmental conditions may mask the creature's movements. Bridges of fallen bamboo, temporary rivulets, and eroded terraces conceal prints and signs, demanding heightened attention to micro-level details. Researchers noted that after heavy rain, new prints would appear, suggesting recent passage and persistence in using specific routes regardless of weather. The highlands' unpredictable climate thus shapes not only the expedition, but also the elusive habits of the primate itself. Responses from native wildlife, alarm calls from langurs, sudden flight from birds, and disturbed undergrowth offer indirect clues to the primate's proximity and possible social patterns. Tracks intersecting with deer trails, but showing evidence of avoidance, imply calculated movement within the terrain. Observers documented the careful attention the creature appears to pay to other species, indicating awareness of both potential prey and threats. These interactions, subtle yet consistent, provide context to the creature's intelligence and further complicate attempts at direct observation. Although meticulously documented, the evidence remains enigmatic, with footprints, sounds, and photographic blurs resisting definitive classification and leaving researchers with more questions than answers. Each expedition returns with fragments, a cast here, a photograph there, an audio clip of a call whose meaning cannot be determined. While inconclusive, the accumulation of data reveals a pattern. The creature is deliberate, observant, and seemingly aware of human presence, consistently choosing when and where to appear. Stories of encounters along highland ridges continue to be shared by villagers, ensuring that the mysterious primate remains a persistent, unseen presence threading through the forest canopy. Tales of fleeting glimpses, unusual vocalizations, and disturbed bamboo echo the patterns observed by modern investigators, bridging generations and blending folklore with scientific inquiry. Researchers leave the region not with certainty but with the knowledge that the highlands are home to an enduring enigma, one that has survived alongside humans while remaining largely hidden. Even when the forest falls silent, the subtle bending of bamboo and the faint imprint of deliberate steps hint at an intelligent presence that has eluded observation for generations, watching the highlands with careful patience. The Lake Baikal Deep Life Survey, Russia. Lake Baikal, stretching like a dark mirror across southern Siberia, has long held a reputation for secrets that defy human understanding, and for the Deep Life Survey, those secrets appeared as faint, unexplained movements far beneath the surface, where pressures rise and sunlight never reaches. Sonar readings recorded broad, slow-moving shapes that suggested a massive organism navigating the abyssal depths, far beyond the ecological zones previously documented. Though scientists approached the possibility with skepticism, the persistence of these readings drew an international team determined to probe what might dwell in the world's oldest and deepest freshwater lake. The team assembled on the rocky northern shores, where jagged cliffs rise from the water's edge, and the wind carries a biting chill, bearing the weight of isolation familiar to researchers accustomed to Siberian extremes. Clad in insulated parkas and reinforced boots, they carried notebooks filled with previous expedition data, sediment analyses, and maps of oxygen and temperature gradients. Reviewing them alongside sonar logs, that recorded anomalies too large and too deliberate to be dismissed as noise. The lake itself is thought to be 20-25 million years old and plunges to a maximum depth exceeding 1,600 metres, creating a world of near-freezing darkness inhospitable to conventional freshwater species, yet home to unique endemic life. From the beginning, the team's work relied on both history and hard data. Lake Baikal spans over 31,500 square kilometres, fed by more than 300 rivers and streams, and contains roughly 1/5 of the planet's unfrozen surface freshwater. Its clarity can reach up to 40 metres, but the lake's temperature and light penetration change drastically with depth, forming distinct layers of stratified water that influence the distribution of known species. The researchers noted these physical characteristics with care, knowing that any unusual readings could be explained by thermoclines, currents, or sediment disturbances, but the echoes persisted, suggesting a presence beyond ordinary life. The first submersible dives descended past 500 metres, where pressure doubles and temperatures linger just above freezing, conditions under which only highly specialised creatures like the translucent Golomianka fish are known to survive. These fish, with their fragile, oil-filled bodies, drift slowly through the cold water, perfectly adapted to an environment most vertebrates could not endure. Yet during the surveys, sonar detected broader forms moving with an apparent intention, shapes too consistent in size and motion to be schools of fish or drifting debris, and the research team recorded every anomaly, cataloguing patterns in hopes of discerning whether it represented life or a geological phenomenon. On shore, the team studied data from earlier robotic surveys that had mapped the lake floor, revealing small mud volcanoes and sediment pockmarks along fault lines in the northwestern basin. These features, created by subterranean gas releases and tectonic activity, hosted colonies of sponges, amphipods, and small worms, yet they also complicated the interpretation of sonar data. Could the massive echoes be a geological quirk amplified by the lake's shape, or did they belong to a living organism capable of navigating the abyssal plains? This question lingered in every conversation, silently shaping the expedition's cautious approach. As the survey progressed, a larger pressure-rated research submersible was deployed, equipped with high-resolution cameras and baited traps designed to lure deep-dwelling creatures. The submersible descended past layers of water populated with copepods, amphipods, and other endemic invertebrates, their transparent bodies drifting in slow, undulating currents. Each sighting reminded the scientists of the lake's evolutionary isolation. Baikal's unique fauna evolved over millions of years in near-complete seclusion, producing life forms unlike those anywhere else on Earth. The diversity of microfauna added weight to the possibility that larger unobserved species could exist in the unexplored depths. Inside the submersible, the lead biologist monitored the camera feed with a quiet intensity, observing fields of sediment dotted with faintly glowing microbial mats, while sonar continued to register elongated, slowly moving echoes just beyond the illuminated area. Past benthic studies had isolated single-celled organisms genetically distinct from known groups, highlighting that the abyssal environment might host life forms that evade standard classification. The slow, deliberate motion of the unidentified echoes suggested intelligence or adaptation beyond mere chance, though interpretation remained speculative amid the pressure, cold, and utter darkness. The team also considered the lake's status as a site for neutrino telescope arrays, embedded at depth to detect subatomic particles passing through the water. This juxtaposition of biological and physical research reminded scientists that Lake Baikal is a frontier not only for ecology but for cutting-edge physics, where clarity and depth create unique conditions for observation. The researchers speculated, with a mix of humour and unease, that the telescope might record phenomena stranger than their own cameras could capture, a silent witness to movements invisible to light but perceptible to sound. Detailed chemical and thermal profiling revealed slight anomalies in temperature and mineral content, suggesting that fluid upwellings from hydrothermal vents or geological fractures might exist in certain abyssal zones. Such features could sustain chemosynthetic ecosystems, entirely independent of sunlight, producing energy-rich compounds capable of supporting complex life forms. The possibility that large organisms could inhabit these chemical oases lent a tangible, albeit speculative, framework to otherwise mysterious sonar readings, raising questions about whether deep life adaptation might extend far beyond known species. Despite methodological rigour, the team could not deny a growing sense of unease and wonder. Observing the lake's unlit depths, where immense pressure and frigid temperatures combined to create a hostile environment, researchers felt simultaneously vulnerable and privileged, peering into a realm largely untouched by humans. Every blip on sonar, every shadow in the submersible's light cone, carried the weight of potential discovery, and even familiar species like golomiancas and amphipods seemed to hint at evolutionary marvels that unseen predators or long-evolved giants may dwarf. During the expedition's deepest dive, the submersible reached the abyssal plains, descending into near silence where water pressure muted sound and light barely penetrated. Here, a series of slow arcs appeared on sonar, repeating with a deliberate rhythm that suggested movement across the lake floor. Scientists watched in hushed fascination, aware that such patterns could indicate large, solitary creatures navigating a territory unseen by humans, yet cameras revealed only sediments shifting and small invertebrates drifting, leaving the anomaly unexplained and heightening the lake's aura of mystery. Multiple attempts to capture images or specimens were met with frustration. The submersible's lights illuminated nothing but sediment ripples and occasional drifting debris. Yet sonar traces continued, persistent and precise, as though an unseen entity was solid to sound but transparent to light. In discussions aboard the research vessel, team members debated whether they had glimpsed a form of life uniquely adapted to the abyss, an unknown predator, or perhaps an extraordinary misreading of the environmental acoustics, amplified by the lake's vast and variable depths. As the expedition concluded, submersibles ascended slowly, passing through layers of water that had remained unchanged for millennia. The lake seemed to settle back into silence, a colossal body of liquid memory that had witnessed centuries of tectonic movement, climate shifts, and the evolution of its endemic species. The team carried data, observations, and photographs. Yet, the questions persisted. What produced the arcs on sonar, and what life forms, if any, moved with such deliberate purpose far below the reach of daylight and human understanding? Returning to the rocky shores, the researchers reflected on the expedition's revelations and limitations. Lake Baikal's depths had offered fleeting glimpses of something remarkable, a presence beyond current biological knowledge. Every sonar reading, every chemical anomaly, every glimpse of a glowing microbial mat hinted at complexity and adaptation that humans are only beginning to comprehend. The lake, immense and ancient, retains its mysteries, teasing observers with signs of life that might never be fully explained. Encased in the unfathomable depths, something watched from the dark. The New Guinea Interior Biological Survey, Papua New Guinea. Deep within the crumpled folds of Papua New Guinea's highlands, villagers spoke of a massive flightless creature whose presence had gone unrecorded by science, glimpsed only in fleeting moments along hidden jungle ridges. The expedition team arrived after weeks of preparation, aware that the interior forests are among the least mapped regions on Earth. Ancient steep valleys, cloaked in dense rainforest, held the promise of discoveries both mundane and extraordinary, while the possibility of encountering a creature unknown to modern biology lent each step an undercurrent of tension and curiosity. Wrapped in the midst of the canopy, the expedition mapped the labyrinthine valleys, noting how precipitous cliffs and swollen rivers created natural barriers that preserved pockets of untouched forest and endemic wildlife. Giant ferns and towering hardwoods formed an almost impenetrable curtain along the slopes, while the soundscape thrummed with the calls of birds of paradise, parrots, and insects in a constant, dizzying rhythm. The team documented flora and fauna along the way, aware that any unusual pattern might indicate the movement of a creature far larger than known species. The team moved cautiously, carrying machetes, GPS units, and camera traps, guided by local trackers who interpreted subtle changes in the vegetation and the faint impressions of footprints in soft earth. Every bend in the path demanded careful observation. A broken branch, a flattened patch of moss, or a mud-stained footprint could be a clue or a misdirection. The tracker's knowledge of seasonal animal movements and forest ecology became indispensable, allowing the researchers to navigate a terrain that might otherwise conceal all evidence of life that moved silently beyond human detection. Branches snapped and leaves quivered along rarely trodden paths, leaving behind signs that hinted at something large moving silently through the undergrowth, defying the dense camouflage of the jungle. Moss and lichen were displaced in a manner inconsistent with known wildlife, and droppings of unidentifiable composition suggested a diet unknown to researchers. Even the most familiar predators appeared incapable of producing tracks of the size, depth, and spacing observed, leaving an unsettling possibility that something entirely new was sharing the forest with human inhabitants. Elders in nearby villages recounted sightings over decades, describing a solitary animal with unusual speed and behaviour, appearing at dawn or dusk before vanishing into the mist-laden forest. They spoke of eyes reflecting light, a heavy gait that left impressions in soft soil, and a capacity to traverse steep ridges that seemed impossible for an ungainly, large-bodied creature. Anthropologists accompanying the expedition carefully recorded these oral histories, noting consistencies and patterns that suggested the accounts were not fanciful, but rooted in repeated first-hand observation. In the muddy banks of a swollen tributary, the researchers discovered a series of deep, elongated footprints and flattened brush, each detail suggesting a creature capable of navigating rugged terrain with remarkable stealth. The prints measured far larger than any cassowary or wild pig known to inhabit the region, with claw marks and toe spacing that resisted straightforward classification. Waterlogged areas preserved impressions unusually well, allowing careful measurement and comparison, and every step raised more questions than answers about the size, behaviour, and speed of the animal responsible. Through the dense undergrowth, signs of the creature's interactions with the ecosystem became apparent. Bent saplings and broken fruit trees suggested feeding habits, while unusual scat samples hinted at a diet incorporating both tubers and small vertebrates, consistent with local accounts of an omnivorous, elusive animal. Researchers documented moss patterns disrupted in ways that indicated heavy body weight and frequent passage, noting that some flattened areas formed natural corridors along ridgelines rarely traversed by humans or other wildlife. These observations provided subtle confirmation that the signs left behind were not random, but rather evidence of a large habituated presence navigating the forest with surprising regularity. Positioned along narrow passes, camera traps recorded activity while drones circled overhead, yet the dense canopy and frequent rain obscured both infrared and visual sensors, leaving only intermittent flashes and fleeting shadows for review. Each triggered image or motion sensor reading demanded careful analysis to distinguish wind-blown leaves, misfired triggers, or ordinary wildlife from something potentially extraordinary. Even with multiple layers of technology, the forest's complexity ensured that evidence remained partial, fragmented, and tantalizingly elusive. The air pulsed with the calls of unseen birds and insects, punctuated by occasional distant thuds or rustles, creating a constant, immersive symphony of the jungle that kept the team alert to every unusual disturbance. Sunlight struggled through the upper canopy, casting shifting patterns across the forest floor that could mislead or obscure observations. At times, the team moved in near silence, attuned to subtle environmental cues, an unusual echo, a sudden absence of sound, or the sway of a vine that hinted at movement unseen. Some anomalies could be explained by known species, like cassowaries or wild pigs, but certain tracks and sounds defied these comparisons, suggesting an animal entirely undocumented by biological surveys. The scale, frequency, and patterning of the traces indicated an apex presence that, while rarely observed directly, exerted an undeniable influence on the forest's ecology. Predator-prey relationships, feeding sites, and territorial markers all hinted at something significant moving in the shadows, a being that had coexisted with villagers for generations without formal scientific recognition. Subtle repetitions among broken branches and footprints indicated habitual movement along certain ridgelines, or feeding areas that the creature favoured without leaving predictable traces. The team began mapping these occurrences, drawing connections between geographical features, seasonal variations, and reports from locals. Each map and log entry suggested deliberate, calculated movement, a behaviour inconsistent with ordinary wildlife wandering randomly, raising the possibility of a highly adapted, intelligent animal thriving in isolation. At one point, a fleeting glimpse of shadow among the ferns and tree trunks suggested proximity, sending the team into tense silence as the forest seemed to watch back with impenetrable patience. A sudden shift in bird calls and the vibration of distant foliage hinted at the presence of something moving with quiet purpose. Every instinct told the researchers to pause and observe, yet the dense environment allowed only partial views, glimpses of legs, blurred movement, and glimpses of a massive undefined silhouette that vanished before confirmation could be made. Despite days of careful observation and documentation, no definitive evidence could confirm the creature's existence, leaving researchers to reconcile tangible signs with the limits of human perception in this dense wilderness. Camera trap footage showed fleeting shadows, footprints dried and faded, local accounts remained oral. The combination of biological data, environmental cues, and eyewitness testimony created a compelling but inconclusive narrative, illustrating both the richness of the ecosystem and the profound challenges of studying an animal that might exist entirely beyond human experience. As the team retreated toward the nearest village, the forest closed behind them, alive with movement and whispers, retaining its secrets as though deliberately shielding whatever lurked in its deepest recesses. The paths they had followed now appeared untravelled, the prints erased, and the noises of the jungle continued with uninterrupted rhythm, indifferent to the fleeting presence of intruders. For all the technology and expertise brought into the highlands, the interior remained as enigmatic as ever, a place where nature dictated terms and the unknown held sway. Beyond the dense canopy and winding ridges, a presence lingered, unseen yet undeniably shaping the shadows of the jungle. The Patagonian Fjords exploration, Chile. The sonar monitor flickered as the team advanced into a narrow fjord channel, each irregular echo suggesting a massive, unseen shape moving beneath the dark, icy waters, drawing attention away from the vessel itself. The crew had prepared for weeks, aware that the fjord's labyrinthine channels could conceal both natural anomalies and unknown creatures. Historical reports from local fishermen spoke of long, serpentine forms slicing through calm waters before vanishing without a trace. As the vessel navigated glacially carved cliffs and submerged rock formations, each sonar blip raised anticipation, blending scientific inquiry with the unease that comes from entering a world largely untouched by human eyes. Cliffs carved by ancient glaciers plunged directly into the deep waters, creating hidden underwater valleys where currents swirled and sunlight barely penetrated. The fjords, remnants of massive ice flows thousands of years old, formed channels that reached depths of over 400 meters in places, creating both refuge and hunting grounds for marine life. The surrounding terrain was rugged, with waterfalls cascading from cliff tops and floating ice debris drifting silently along the channels. In these shadowed corridors, the usual markers of wildlife were absent or muted, lending a sense of isolation and heightening the tension that every echo could indicate something extraordinary lurking below. On board, marine biologists and sonar specialists adjusted equipment, logging water temperature, salinity, and depth, while the crew navigated passages known for sudden storms and submerged hazards. Sonar units hummed with constant feedback, displaying the topography of fjord bottoms and any movement in the water column. Cameras mounted on small submersibles were lowered at intervals, their lenses scanning for unusual shapes in dim, icy waters. The expedition combined technology with intuition, relying on experience from previous deepwater surveys, yet aware that the sheer remoteness of these channels meant that confirmation would be difficult even with state-of-the-art instruments. Initial surveys traced the fjord floor with sonar, revealing undulating contours and peculiar disturbances in sediment patterns that hinted at movement too large to be ordinary fish or marine mammals. Shadows of sediment plumes and abrupt shifts in sonar echoes suggested a body navigating near the fjord floor, leaving traces that were visible only in indirect readings. Each anomaly was carefully logged, compared and cross-referenced against known species and geological formations, yet some movements persisted without a plausible explanation, maintaining the sense that the fjord harboured an extraordinary presence hidden beneath its surface. Fishermen from nearby villages recounted sightings of long, dark shapes slicing through calm waters, describing serpentine motions that vanished as quickly as they appeared, leaving only ripples and disrupted bird activity as evidence. They spoke of encounters occurring at dawn or twilight, when the water was still and the fog had not yet settled, emphasizing the creature's elusiveness. Some described moments when seabirds scattered as if startled by something massive below, reinforcing the impression that a large, unseen predator moved with deliberate stealth through these isolated channels. Along the fjord edges, the team noticed subtle disturbances in kelp forests and floating ice debris, suggesting that something unusually large moved near the surface in mid-water zones, altering currents and displacing schools of small fish in irregular patterns. Observers also recorded fleeting changes in water temperature and salinity at precise depths, hinting at underwater movements too deliberate to be caused by wind or tides alone. Combined with local knowledge, these physical cues offered additional evidence of a creature navigating the fjord's complex channels, with a presence that left measurable, though indirect, traces of its passage. Irregular sonar echoes returned repeatedly from depths exceeding 200 meters, showing forms that moved deliberately along channels, yet reflected no light when cameras were deployed, perplexing even the most experienced operators. The echo suggested a long, sinuous body, maneuvering in ways inconsistent with known marine mammals. Analysts compared speed, movement patterns, and echo intensity, noting that these signals were consistent over multiple surveys, hinting at a recurring presence that had likely evaded human detection for decades. Sudden fog and wind gusts swept through the fjords, altering visibility and sound, forcing the team to pause or adjust their instruments while waves slapped against the vessel, underscoring the environment's volatility. The unpredictable weather complicated navigation and observation, turning calm waters into treacherous stretches where sonar readings could be distorted by surface conditions. Each interruption heightened tension, reminding the team that the fjord's isolation provided both cover and concealment for the unknown creature, and that even the smallest environmental change could erase evidence of its presence. From small boats and drones, fleeting silhouettes sometimes appeared beneath the surface, their outlines blurred and indistinct, vanishing before confirmation could be made. Shadows shifted in the cold depths, hints of a massive body that slipped through channels with a grace disproportionate to its size. The expeditioners' attempts to track these glimpses often revealed nothing upon closer inspection, leaving them with images of distorted shapes and partial outlines that could be interpreted in multiple ways, yet refused to reveal the creature definitively. Seabirds circled overhead, and schools of fish scattered in patterns inconsistent with typical predation, suggesting an unseen force moving through the water with calculated, quiet precision. Observers noted that the disturbances occurred in areas too deep for ordinary predators to frequent consistently. The team documented these behavioral anomalies meticulously, recognizing that such indirect evidence could be as telling as direct observation when studying a creature that avoided contact with humans and technology alike. Over successive sonar sweeps, slow, purposeful arcs were observed in the fjord channels, raising the possibility of a large, intelligent organism navigating terrain known to few humans, yet remaining undetected by conventional observation. The movement suggested a combination of territorial behavior and careful avoidance of human presence, hinting at a creature both aware of its environment and adapted to it in ways that challenged existing biological understanding. Analysts debated possible species identity, but concluded that no known marine animal fully matched the observed patterns. At one moment, waves lapped against the hull with unusual frequency and direction, as if an unseen body had passed close beneath the vessel, leaving a palpable disturbance without exposing itself to sight. Crew members noted the sudden change in current and ripple patterns, taking measurements and photographs for later analysis. These brief but undeniable interactions with the unknown presence reinforced the team's sense that the fjords harboured a large, elusive organism capable of exerting influence on the environment without ever revealing its form. After days of careful monitoring, the team reflected on the enigmatic presence, documenting anomalies, environmental patterns, and fleeting glimpses, yet lacking definitive proof to identify or categorize the creature they sought. Logs and sonar recordings were compared against historical accounts and local testimonies, creating a compelling, though inconclusive, mosaic of evidence. The survey highlighted both the richness of the fjord's ecosystems and the persistent limits of human knowledge, as the unknown continued to evade capture despite exhaustive effort. As the vessel retreated toward open channels, the fjord's glassy surfaces regained their deceptive calm, masking the depths below where mystery persisted, and the isolation of the landscape reinforced how little humans truly understood these waters. The cliffs and glaciers reflected sunlight, hiding in plain view the vast cold channels that could conceal an apex presence. Even after leaving the fjord network, the team carried a sense of unresolved tension, aware that their brief presence had intersected with something far larger and more enigmatic than the technology or observation could reveal. Something moved through the icy channels and shadowed waters, unseen yet unmistakably present, leaving the fjord's deepest mysteries untouched. The Amazon Headwaters Predator Study, Brazil. Fragments of partially devoured carcasses along narrow tributaries first alerted researchers to a predator moving beyond the behaviour of any known species, prompting a cautious approach through the labyrinthine waterways of the Amazon headwaters. The team navigated the floodplain with quiet determination, aware that each bend in the river could conceal both natural hazards and the creature itself. Reports from local communities suggested a predator that moved with surprising discretion, leaving little trace except for disrupted vegetation and occasional feeding remains. Every observation was treated with measured attention, balancing the need for evidence against the risks of venturing too far into the dense forest. The river twisted through flooded forests and sediment-laden channels, where submerged roots and fallen trees created obstacles that forced both humans and wildlife to navigate with extreme care. Seasonal flooding had expanded narrow tributaries into wide, slow-moving sheets of water, while dense canopy cover filtered sunlight into muted greens and browns. The team noted how subtle shifts in watercolour or flow could reveal animal movement, and how the interplay between river depth and floating debris might obscure or amplify signs of passage. In this dynamic environment, tracking an unknown predator required constant vigilance and adaptation to the jungle's rhythms. Wildlife biologists and local guides prepared equipment ranging from camera traps to motion-sensitive sensors, carefully positioning each device along suspected travel routes and feeding sites for maximum observational coverage. Traps were set at varying heights to capture both terrestrial and semi-aquatic movement, while sensors recorded subtle vibrations in the soil and water. Each placement was chosen with strategic attention to topography, tidal fluctuations, and proximity to known wildlife corridors. The team's methodology combined indigenous knowledge with modern scientific techniques, emphasizing both patience and precision as they waited for signs of the elusive predator. Early surveys revealed irregular footprints pressed into saturated riverbanks and vegetation torn in patterns inconsistent with known jaguars, giant otters, or other apex predators of the region. Some impressions suggested unusual stride lengths and weight distribution, hinting at a larger body than previously documented species. Branches snapped in a pattern that implied deliberate movement rather than accident, and ground litter such as leaves and fallen fruit showed signs of disturbance concentrated along hidden pathways. Collectively, these observations painted a picture of an animal adapted to stealth and mastery of its environment, evading detection even in areas frequented by local wildlife. Indigenous trackers shared stories of a massive predator moving silently along the rivers, often disappearing into tributaries where humans rarely ventured, lending credibility to the team's growing sense of unease. They described moments when animals seemed to freeze as the creature passed, a subtle influence that suggested intelligence or habitual awareness. The team cross-referenced these accounts with ecological data, noting correlations between reported sightings and areas of unusual predation or displaced wildlife. These testimonies, though anecdotal, provided a framework for understanding the predator's movements and possible behaviours within the broader ecosystem. Along the river edges, the team noticed subtle disturbances in kelp-like aquatic vegetation and floating detritus, suggesting that something unusually large moved near the surface and mid-water zones, altering currents and displacing schools of small fish in irregular patterns. Observers also recorded fleeting changes in water temperature and salinity at precise depths, hinting at underwater movements too deliberate to be caused by wind or tides alone. Combined with local knowledge, these physical cues offered additional evidence of a creature navigating the Amazon's complex channels with a presence that left measurable, though indirect, traces of its passage. Observations of disrupted water flow and shifting sediment suggested the presence of a large body moving beneath the surface, creating currents that left subtle but measurable anomalies in otherwise calm channels. The team measured the speed and direction of these disturbances, noting that they occurred repeatedly in similar locations and appeared too coordinated to be the result of natural river turbulence. Instruments indicated minor but consistent pressure changes, hinting at an organism capable of exerting significant force while remaining largely invisible, emphasizing both the creature's size and its deliberate avoidance of human detection. At dusk, the jungle became a chorus of distant calls and rustling leaves, while shadowed movements along the banks hinted at creatures aware of the team's presence but remaining hidden in near-total darkness. The team reported fleeting glimpses of large shapes moving parallel to the river, always at a distance and never fully illuminated. These moments were accompanied by sudden wildlife reactions, bird flocks taking flight, fish scattering, and small mammals vanishing into undergrowth, providing indirect but compelling signs of a predator exerting influence over its surroundings. Unidentifiable shapes and movements flickered near carcass sites, providing tantalizing yet inconclusive evidence that something large and methodical was active in the area. Blurred motion and partial silhouettes hinted at an elongated body, moving with speed and precision. Analysis of multiple camera feeds suggested repeated visitation to the same areas, possibly indicating hunting grounds or habitual pathways. The imagery, though incomplete, underscored a pattern of calculated movement and selective engagement with the environment. Displaced fish and scattered scavengers offered indirect clues to the predator's hunting patterns, as if the jungle itself responded to a presence beyond familiar apex species. Birds avoided certain canopy sections, while smaller mammals altered foraging routes, indicating a predator whose influence extended through multiple levels of the ecosystem. The team recorded these behavioral shifts with detailed logs, seeking correlations between prey behavior and the appearance of indirect signs, realizing that the predator's impact on its surroundings was as telling as any direct sighting. Converging waterways revealed repeated tracks suggesting a deliberate pattern, with the predator following routes aligned with both food sources and natural corridors through dense floodplain forests. Each set of tracks corresponded with observed disturbances in vegetation and water flow, indicating a creature capable of navigating a complex environment with precision. These patterns hinted at intelligence and adaptability, as the predator appeared to exploit both river channels and the adjoining forest systematically, avoiding detection while maximizing access to resources. During a brief nighttime patrol, reflective eyes caught on a river bend vanished instantly into shadowed undergrowth, leaving the team with an unshakable sense of a deliberate, intelligent observer nearby. The sudden flash of movement coincided with subtle changes in wildlife behavior, reinforcing the impression that the predator was aware of human presence. The encounter was fleeting but confirmed that the elusive animal could operate undetected even in proximity, reinforcing both its size and its mastery of the Amazonian terrain. After days of meticulous documentation, the team acknowledged that while their data was compelling, it remained inconclusive, leaving a persistent uncertainty about the predator's identity and capabilities. Despite extensive tracking, camera recordings, and environmental measurements, no direct identification could be made. The evidence painted a picture of a large, intelligent carnivore adapted to the dense waterways of the Amazon headwaters, a creature whose presence was undeniable yet stubbornly resistant to scientific classification. As the sun rose over the headwaters, the river resumed its silent course, with only scattered evidence of recent activity hinting at a large presence that had moved unseen through the forest. Logs, disturbed undergrowth, and fleeting animal reactions remained as subtle markers of a predator operating beyond the reach of conventional observation. Even as the team retreated to safer zones, the feeling persisted that their survey had only scratched the surface of the unknown forces moving within the Amazonian labyrinth. Movement with calculated stealth traced the river's hidden channels, leaving a trail of questions that the dense Amazon refused to answer. The Hebrides sonar sweep, Scotland. A sudden surge of waves along the Hebrides' jagged coastline hinted at hidden movement, as currents twisted around submerged ridges in ways that suggested something massive yet unseen. Expedition vessels navigated cautiously, aware that underwater cliffs and deep channels could conceal organisms far larger than typical marine life. Observers noted subtle ripples that did not correspond to tides or winds, prompting speculation that the disturbances might originate from a single enormous unidentified creature. Even veteran marine biologists acknowledged that the region's labyrinthine waters offered both concealment and opportunity for an apex organism to remain hidden from human eyes. Narrow channels carved between rocky islands forced the expedition vessels into precise maneuvering, revealing deep depressions and underwater cliffs that could shelter a creature of extraordinary size. Sonar maps indicated sudden changes in topography, steep ridges giving way to valleys hundreds of meters deep. Currents accelerated unpredictably, sometimes creating surface patterns that resembled the movement of something vast below. These physical characteristics made navigation hazardous, but also provided natural concealment, increasing the plausibility that a large, unknown aquatic organism could inhabit the area without being easily observed. Teams of marine biologists and hydroacoustic technicians worked in concert with vessel crews, deploying submersibles, hydrophones, and high-resolution side-scan sonar equipment to survey the channels. Each device was carefully calibrated, with multiple overlapping passes to verify readings and reduce the chance of false signals. Data was logged meticulously, noting water temperature, salinity, and current speed to identify environmental factors that might influence sonar or acoustic results. The team's coordinated approach reflected a recognition that technology alone was insufficient to confirm the presence of a creature so elusive. Early acoustic scans produced irregular signals that shifted unpredictably, moving faster than expected for any known marine animal while avoiding direct observation. Analysts compared these anomalies against known marine species patterns, finding inconsistencies in size, speed, and movement direction. The readings were fleeting yet frequent enough to suggest that the anomalies were deliberate rather than random environmental noise. These early signals provided both excitement and frustration, as the team could neither confirm nor fully track the source, hinting at an intelligence or instinctive behavior beyond typical marine life. Fishermen and longtime island residents contributed anecdotal evidence that, aligned with the expedition's observations, many described massive shapes gliding beneath boats, moving with smooth, deliberate motion, often leaving sediment disturbed without ever surfacing. One account detailed a shadow stretching tens of meters, moving just beneath the surface before disappearing near the rocky bend. Other reports spoke of unusual wave patterns and the sudden dispersal of seabirds, events coinciding with areas of known sonar anomalies. These human observations, while not scientifically verified, provided a cultural and historical context that made the mystery more compelling. Analysis of recurring anomalies suggested a pattern of movement along specific deep channels, indicating a creature that understood and exploited its environment. Some signals appeared during daylight, others only at night, suggesting adaptive behavior possibly tied to hunting or avoiding detection. Mapping these occurrences revealed a recurring rhythm, paths connecting deep depressions, potential feeding grounds, and sheltered areas. The consistency of these routes implied more than chance, suggesting an organism with spatial awareness and deliberate movement through complex coastal terrain. Magnetic and temperature sensors occasionally recorded brief fluctuations in otherwise stable waters, hinting at the passage of a large, warm-blooded organism moving at depth. These anomalies often corresponded with locations where submersible cameras later caught ambiguous shapes or disturbances in sediment, reinforcing the idea that the creature could influence both the water column and the seabed. By mapping these sensor readings alongside sonar data, the team noticed correlations between the physical anomalies and repeated movement patterns, suggesting an organism capable of regulating its depth and perhaps even generating heat to navigate colder underwater regions. Such findings indicated adaptation to the Hebrides cold currents, a trait that distinguished this presence from typical marine mammals. Remotely operated submersible cameras occasionally captured vague, elongated silhouettes that moved fluidly with the currents. While images were distorted by low light and water turbidity, the shapes hinted at a body far larger than familiar species. Some shadows appeared to alter their orientation deliberately, avoiding obstacles and shifting with the terrain, reinforcing the impression of intelligence and awareness. Each fleeting glimpse heightened tension aboard the vessels, as crew members weighed the possibility of observing an apex predator against the limitations of their instruments. Choppy seas, shifting tides, and sporadic storms complicated both acoustic and visual monitoring. The unpredictable nature of the Hebrides waters meant that even the most careful survey could yield inconclusive results. A sudden squall could scatter surface debris, generating false echoes, while strong currents distorted submersible images. The team adapted constantly, recalibrating instruments and re-evaluating prior anomalies in light of environmental interference. This constant adjustment underscored the challenge of documenting a creature that may exploit these dynamic conditions to remain unseen. Indirect evidence emerged from environmental cues that supported the team's observations. Schools of fish scattered without apparent cause, seabirds changed flight patterns abruptly, and minor surface disturbances coincided with anomalous readings. Such signs suggested that the creature's presence influenced the surrounding ecosystem even when it was not directly observed. Recording these indirect effects alongside acoustic data allowed the team to build a more complete picture of activity, highlighting interactions between the organism and its environment that might otherwise have gone unnoticed. Tracking across the area revealed movement at multiple depths and locations, implying strategic navigation and adaptability. The organism appeared capable of exploiting both the seabed and mid-water channels, suggesting versatility in its behaviour. Analysts noted the signal's consistency and the apparent avoidance of human vessels, indicating intelligence or instinctive caution. The recurrence of anomalies along predictable routes reinforced the idea that the creature was a permanent resident of these waters, not a transient visitor, adding to the sense of a hidden apex presence within the archipelago. On one night patrol, a sharp acoustic spike coincided with a fleeting shadow gliding along the channel floor. Crew members felt a tangible tension as they debated whether the reading represented a single organism or a series of smaller objects producing the illusion of mass. The moment lasted only seconds, but it emphasized the difficulty of confirming a creature's presence in an environment as unpredictable as the North Atlantic. Observers realized that even with advanced technology, a direct encounter might remain elusive, highlighting the limits of human observation in these deep, complex waters. Interpretation of the collected data suggested an apex organism capable of stealth, speed, and adaptation to the harsh, variable conditions of the Hebrides. The combination of recurring sonar anomalies, fleeting visual traces, and environmental disruption painted a consistent picture of an unclassified predator operating within its habitat with efficiency. While its exact size and identity could not be verified, all evidence pointed to a presence that challenged current understanding of the region's marine biodiversity, implying the possibility of a species unknown to science. By morning, the waters returned to apparent calm, yet acoustic logs and indirect signs bore testimony to repeated activity by something unobserved and unclassified. Vessels returned to dock, instruments were carefully retrieved, and the team began compiling and analysing data with renewed focus. Despite the inconclusive nature of direct observation, the combined evidence reinforced the notion of an elusive apex organism. The North Atlantic waters resumed their surface calm, masking the ongoing mystery below and preserving the tension between scientific curiosity and the unknown. In the twisting currents and hidden channels of the Hebrides, an unknown presence moved with deliberate precision, leaving only traces that no technology could fully decode. The Taklamakan Desert Track Analysis, China. Impressions in the sand stretched farther than any known desert animal could make, hinting at the passage of a creature both massive and elusive. The tracks were unusually wide, deeply impressed into the hard-packed surfaces of desert flats, yet vanished when the dunes shifted under even a gentle breeze. Their spacing suggested a creature of extraordinary stride and weight, one capable of moving through this inhospitable terrain with surprising speed and control. Scientists and local guides alike marvelled at the mystery, aware that the Taklamakan had long been home to both documented species and whispers of the unexplained. The Taklamakan's endless dunes rose and fell like frozen waves, their shifting peaks and troughs erasing evidence almost as quickly as it appeared. Temperatures swung dramatically between scorching days and frigid nights, accelerating the movement of sand and masking the creature's presence. Sandstorms were frequent, carrying grains that sculpted new patterns across the desert floor and often obliterated older tracks. This constant reshaping of the terrain added urgency to the expedition, as every footprint or bone fragment risked being lost to the desert's relentless dynamics. A team of biologists and geologists combed the sands with precision instruments, seeking patterns in footprints and skeletal fragments that might reveal an unknown inhabitant. Equipped with measuring tools, GPS mapping, and cameras, they meticulously recorded each anomaly. Drones provided aerial perspectives, capturing the vastness of the landscape and allowing the team to trace paths invisible from the ground. Each step was deliberate, as even the smallest misinterpretation could misrepresent the size or behavior of the mysterious creature. Early morning light revealed depressions in the sand, unusually deep and spaced far apart, suggesting a creature with exceptional weight and stride. Shadows cast by low-angle sunlight emphasized the contours of each print, revealing subtle features such as claw impressions or tail drag marks. The team carefully measured stride length, direction, and depth, comparing them with known species from similar desert environments. The consistency of these impressions indicated that the tracks were not random or transient, but the result of deliberate movement across the arid landscape. Scattered bones, partially buried beneath fine sand, offered tantalizing clues, their composition defying immediate classification and suggesting adaptation to extreme desert conditions. Some fragments appeared thicker and denser than expected, while others displayed wear patterns inconsistent with known desert fauna. The placement of the bones suggested they had been moved slightly by wind or sand, but were not fully disarticulated, hinting at a creature large enough to leave skeletal evidence behind, yet elusive enough to avoid direct observation. Pieces of plant matter clung to the deeper grooves of some tracks, hinting that the creature occasionally moved through the sparse vegetation along oasis fringes, rather than staying solely on open sand. Analysis revealed that certain footprints contained impressions of small desert shrubs and reed stems, suggesting that the organism might forage or navigate through areas with minimal water and plant life. This indicated a level of environmental adaptation that went beyond simple desert survival, implying intelligence in route selection and an ability to exploit scarce resources. By cross-referencing these impressions with the skeletal fragments, the team began to identify correlations between foraging areas and habitual pathways, offering new insights into how a large, unknown creature could persist in one of the harshest deserts on Earth. Local nomads spoke of fleeting shadows and distant rustlings along the dunes, accounts consistent with the mysterious tracks and skeletal fragments being studied. Their stories described movements at dawn or dusk when the desert was most forgiving to life and least forgiving to observers. Some recalled hearing deep, resonant thuds or seeing shapes glide silently between ridges, only to vanish as if swallowed by the sand. While anecdotal, these accounts provided a cultural and historical dimension, suggesting that the creature had long existed within the collective memory of those who traversed the Taklamakan. Wind and temperature shifts constantly altered the landscape, erasing footprints or exposing bones in patterns that made temporal interpretation a careful exercise. Overnight, cooler temperatures hardened the sand, preserving faint tracks, while midday heat softened the surface, allowing grains to settle and distort the evidence. The team had to account for these environmental variables in their analysis, recognizing that the desert itself was an active participant in the story they were trying to uncover. Without this understanding, even the most precise measurements could misrepresent the creature's behavior or size. Using drones and 3D scanning, expedition members meticulously documented each track and fragment to preserve evidence before the desert could reclaim it. Photogrammetry allowed them to create detailed digital models of footprints, while skeletal fragments were catalogued and photographed from multiple angles. By layering this data onto maps of dunes and terrain features, the team sought to identify movement patterns over time. The combination of ground-based and aerial data provided a holistic view of the desert environment, enhancing the likelihood of detecting repeated passages or territorial routes of the unknown creature. Consistent alignment of tracks suggested a habitual route or migratory corridor, hinting at purposeful navigation through the harsh terrain. Tracks appeared consistently along certain ridges and valley floors, indicating an understanding of the desert's shifting sands and an ability to travel efficiently. These paths avoided open, windswept flats when possible, implying the creature's movement was strategic rather than random. Such patterns, combined with the spacing and depth of the tracks, suggested a predator or apex organism capable of surviving in an environment few species could inhabit successfully. At times, the team glimpsed movement just beyond ridges, subtle disturbances that raised the possibility the creature was observing them as closely as they observed it. Dust clouds rose in sudden puffs, Faint shadows shifted against distant dunes, and sand rippled in unnatural patterns. These fleeting signs of life reinforced the notion that the creature was aware of its environment and perhaps adept at remaining undetected. Observers felt a quiet tension, knowing that a single misstep could erase crucial evidence or provoke a response from the hidden animal. Stride length, depth, and bone placement indicated behavioral patterns consistent with a predator adapted to survive in sparse, arid conditions. The creature appeared capable of long, energy-efficient movements between food sources or water, and its skeletal adaptations implied resilience to extreme temperatures. Such findings, while speculative, provided a glimpse into the possible biology and ecology of an organism operating beyond the known desert fauna. Each observation reinforced the notion of an apex presence, one that had endured the Taklamakan's challenges for generations. Despite rigorous documentation and cross-referencing with known desert fauna, uncertainty persisted, emphasizing the difficulty of concluding in such a dynamic environment. Tracks could vanish overnight, bones could shift with the wind, and temperature extremes could obscure subtle signs of life. The team recognized that the desert was both revealing and concealing evidence simultaneously, leaving gaps in understanding that might never be filled. Yet, every anomaly, footprint, or fragment contributed to a growing tapestry of mystery that could not be ignored. When evening shadows stretched across the western dunes, the desert returned to its unbroken silence, leaving only faint traces of a presence that may never be fully understood. Sand drifted slowly across previously mapped paths, erasing edges of impressions and concealing the skeletons that had been painstakingly documented. The team packed their equipment, aware that the Taklamakan had offered only fragments of answers, and that the creature, if it still roamed, remained as hidden and enigmatic as ever. Amid the shifting sands and silent expanse of the Taklamakan, a hidden traveller left paths that vanished before they could be traced, carrying its secrets across the desert undisturbed. The Borneo Canopy Observation Project, Malaysia. An irregular thrum ran through the observation platform, signalling movement too deliberate to belong to any ordinary animal. Researchers held their breath as the subtle vibration travelled along the ropes connecting the towers, each pulse suggesting something large and deliberate had made its way through the upper canopy. The air hung thick with humidity, carrying the scent of wet leaves and earth, yet the source of the movement remained invisible. Even from their elevated position, the observers could only sense the weight and presence of a creature that defied easy classification, a being that had been whispered about in local reports for decades, but never fully documented. Sensors picked up minute pressure changes along the ropes, tracing a pattern that hinted at immense weight above the human gaze. The motion was uneven, purposeful, and precise, not the random disturbance of falling branches or the familiar scuttling of known arboreal mammals. Field technicians cross-referenced the readings with the team's database of primate activity and found nothing to account for such a force. The subtle fluctuations suggested deliberate placement of weight, as though the creature was consciously testing its footing or traversing difficult terrain with experience that surpassed any documented species in the region. A series of clicks and low-frequency hums emerged from the upper branches, defying identification against the known calls of local wildlife. The sound carried through the humid air in a manner that reverberated across multiple levels of the canopy, penetrating both foliage and the thick undergrowth below. Researchers adjusted their audio equipment to isolate the frequencies, comparing them with recordings of gibbons, orangutans, and macaques. Nothing matched, and the intervals of the hums implied intent rather than random communication, suggesting that the organism had a form of vocal expression or echolocation entirely unknown to science. Fragments of bark stripped in unusual patterns suggested feeding techniques that challenged the team's understanding of arboreal foraging. Leaves were torn with clean precision, twigs bent or removed at odd angles, and vines bore marks consistent with heavy manipulation. The researchers catalogued each instance meticulously, noting differences from established primate behaviour. Patterns indicated an ability to use tools or leverage natural features for support, or at least a level of strength and coordination far beyond what was expected for the region's documented species. The implications were staggering. A creature capable of sustained movement and foraging in the upper canopy, leaving indirect traces without ever revealing its form. Occasional shifts in the camera's field revealed indistinct forms, their size and shape impossible to reconcile with a documented species. Infrared cameras placed on platforms captured movement that blurred and disappeared in a single frame, hinting at an occupant that could navigate branches with fluid grace. The frames were analysed repeatedly, yet each remained ambiguous. Even when enhanced digitally, the movements lacked identifiable markers such as fur patterns or tail shapes that would link them to any known primate, leaving the team with only the certainty of motion and weight. Soft impressions in mud near scattered pools indicated rare descents, each track fading before full analysis could be completed. The prints were unusually large, elongated, and spaced in a pattern that suggested purposeful walking or climbing, not random wandering. Rain softened the soil quickly, erasing evidence before the researchers could cast molds or measure dimensions accurately. Still, the existence of these temporary traces corroborated reports from local communities that described a creature moving between the upper canopy and the forest floor with unpredictable frequency. Now and then, researchers found partially eaten fruits and broken seed pods in positions impossible for known primates to reach, hinting at a dietary range that included the uppermost emergent trees. Botanical surveys identified several rare figs and durian trees whose fruits showed signs of selective feeding, stripped clean in a way that suggested careful manipulation rather than random consumption. Insects and smaller arboreal mammals were often displaced from these feeding sites, implying that the unknown creature's presence had a subtle but measurable impact on the local canopy ecology. By cataloguing these feeding traces alongside footprints and camera footage, the team began to assemble an ecological profile of the organism, revealing not only its elusive movement patterns, but also its role as a potentially dominant canopy inhabitant. Vibrations travelled along intertwined vines, in rhythms inconsistent with natural movement, hinting at calculated steps above the ground. Field instruments detected fluctuations that could not be explained by wind or typical wildlife activity. The pattern suggested intentional pacing, as though the organism was aware of obstacles and human observers, choosing paths that minimized exposure. Such behavior demonstrated an intelligence and spatial awareness rarely seen in large arboreal mammals, reinforcing the team's growing suspicion that they were dealing with a species entirely undocumented by science. Displaced foliage created a maze of invisible pathways, mapping habitual travel without ever revealing the traveller directly. The researchers noted recurring patterns in broken leaves, bent vines, and displaced moss, using these signs to infer routes through multiple layers of the canopy. These pathways often overlapped, suggesting repeated use over time, yet the organism maintained an almost complete invisibility. Its presence was recorded only in the disturbances it left behind, leaving the scientists to reconstruct its behaviour like a puzzle composed entirely of absence and partial traces. Observers froze as subtle shifts in the upper layers betrayed the presence of an entity aware of their surveillance. Even the slightest creak of a branch could trigger a pause, as the team sought to avoid startling the unknown occupant. Each movement, measured or erratic, implied cognition and calculation. The creature appeared to recognise human observation and adjusted its behaviour accordingly, further complicating efforts to capture a visual confirmation. The tension was palpable, the forest around the towers feeling alive with both anticipation and elusiveness. Responses from primates and birds signalled a disturbance that could only come from an organism far heavier than ordinary wildlife. Flocks scattered abruptly, and long-tailed macaques vocalised in alarm, yet no predator or known primate appeared. These reactions, combined with the indirect evidence of broken branches and displaced foliage, provided an ecological signature: the presence of a large, intelligent and carefully mobile organism that commanded the attention of the existing arboreal fauna. Triangulating the signs of passage suggested deliberate avoidance, intelligence, and adaptation within the complex vertical environment. The team compared vibrations, camera recordings, and indirect traces across multiple towers, piecing together patterns that indicated the creature could navigate difficult terrain with awareness of both natural obstacles and observers. Each observation reinforced the notion of an entity, capable of planning its movement with behavioural sophistication unlike any known large primate in Borneo. Following hours of continuous observation, only traces, vibrations, and fleeting sounds provided evidence of ongoing activity. Researchers were forced to rely on inference, mapping possible routes and predicting movements without ever seeing the creature directly. Each methodical note, every recording and measurement, became part of a growing dossier of indirect signs that spoke more loudly than direct observation could, emphasizing the creature's mastery of concealment and its dominance in the arboreal realm. The upper forest hummed with hidden motion, leaving the team with more questions than answers about the elusive occupant. Patterns suggested that the creature moved along habitual corridors while responding to environmental cues and the presence of other animals, yet its form and full size remained unknown. Each careful observation reinforced the mystery, blending tangible evidence with speculation and highlighting the challenge of documenting something that existed almost entirely beyond human perception. Findings suggested continued activity in the upper layers, a life carefully concealed but constantly moving within the team's field of study. Broken branches, partially consumed foliage, and fleeting sounds all painted a picture of intelligence, strength, and elusiveness. The observations confirmed the reports collected from local communities over decades, lending credibility to stories that had long been dismissed as folklore. The Borneo canopy had revealed a presence that demanded careful scientific attention, yet it remained resolutely hidden, asserting its existence in ways both subtle and profound. Shrouded in the interwoven heights of Borneo's giants, something moved unseen, leaving traces that whispered of a life forever beyond human reach. The Lake Tele Recon Dive, Republic of the Congo. The first descent into Lake Tele revealed water dark enough to obscure even the strongest beam of light. Yet villagers' tales of a long-necked creature echoed in the researchers' minds. The lake, tucked deep within the Republic of the Congo, had long been a site of whispered accounts describing an enormous aquatic organism. Local reports suggested a creature capable of moving beneath the surface with surprising speed and grace, often glimpsed as a sinuous form rising and disappearing in the lake's calm stretches. For the expedition team, these stories formed the basis of their mission: to observe, record, and if possible, document something entirely unknown to science. Submersibles were lowered carefully, their hulls creaking under pressure as instruments recorded temperature gradients and water density at progressively greater depths. Each vessel was equipped with high-resolution cameras, sonar arrays, and sampling tools designed for deep freshwater exploration. The operators monitored descent rates, ensuring the sensitive equipment could adapt to the lake's varying thermoclines and suspended sediments. As the vehicle sank, the muted light filtered through the water, turning greenish-brown and giving the underwater world a sense of alien isolation. Every sound, the hum of motors, the click of sensors, was amplified, reminding the team that their presence alone disturbed the lake's silent ecosystem. A sudden irregular sonar reflection pulsed across the monitor, hinting at movement too deliberate to belong to known fish or submerged logs. The team froze, noting the object's size estimate and movement speed. It glided in patterns that suggested intent, not the random drifting of aquatic life or plant debris. Multiple passes confirmed the blip was real, though fleeting. The submersible adjusted position, following the trail cautiously, but the creature had vanished behind a submerged ridge. These intermittent detections mirrored decades of local eyewitness reports, lending credibility to the idea that something large and unknown inhabited the deeper waters. Floating vegetation and the silhouettes of native fish species provided contrast, allowing scientists to gauge scale and infer possible interactions with an unseen presence. Tetras and cichlids darted among water plants, their movements forming a living backdrop. Yet, whenever the team tracked disturbances in sediment or ripples in calm pools, these smaller species' activity could not account for the patterns. By comparing the speed and direction of anomalies against the behavior of documented species, researchers began creating a preliminary map of likely corridors used by the elusive organism, hinting at a life highly adapted to this isolated freshwater environment. Through a cloud of suspended silt, cameras occasionally captured fleeting shapes, elongated and sinuous, vanishing before any identification could be made. Shadows moved with a deliberate fluidity, sometimes curling around vegetation or vanishing in depressions of the lake bed. Each frame was scrutinized repeatedly, yet the imagery was never definitive. researchers could make out size estimates far exceeding any known species in Lake Tele, and shapes suggested a long, flexible neck or appendage capable of precise movement. The creature's presence was inferred in fragments, leaving the team with a continuous tension between hope and uncertainty. Marks in the lakebed formed lines that suggested conscious travel, as though an intelligent organism knew the lake intimately. Currents alone could not account for the repeated routes detected on sonar. Researchers documented these travel corridors, noting that anomalies often followed predictable pathways between shallow feeding zones and deeper resting areas. Even in the absence of direct sightings, the consistency of these movement patterns indicated cognitive awareness, further supporting the notion that Lake Tele harboured a species whose behaviour defied existing biological expectations. Temperature shifts and turbidity fluctuations complicated the exploration, creating zones where visibility dropped to near zero, and instruments seemed to register phantom echoes. Sudden clouding of water from stirred sediment would obscure camera lenses, while temperature boundaries would alter sonar readings unpredictably. These environmental factors added to the challenge of capturing unambiguous evidence, leaving investigators to rely on indirect cues. The team learned to interpret subtle disturbances, faint pressure waves, minor displacements of plant matter, or fleeting sonar reflections, as possible indicators of an organism moving unseen through the depths. Reports from nearby fishermen spoke of long, undulating forms and sudden ripples in calm waters, reinforcing the notion that something substantial inhabited these hidden depths. Interviews with villagers bordering the lake revealed consistent descriptions: a dark, elongated neck appearing above the surface for brief moments, large undulations moving beneath boats, and water displaced in unusual patterns. These reports, often dismissed by outsiders as folklore, aligned strikingly with sonar anomalies and fleeting visual evidence, encouraging scientists to treat traditional knowledge as a complementary layer of data in understanding Lake Tele's mysteries. By combining sonar trails, camera footage, and bathymetric maps, the team began to reconstruct a three-dimensional picture of movement patterns, revealing both repetition and unpredictability. Submersible operators overlaid mapped corridors with observed anomalies, identifying zones where sightings and disturbances were most frequent. These patterns suggested regular feeding and resting areas, possibly corridors that the creature avoided when detecting human presence. Through meticulous documentation, the researchers created a preliminary behavioural model, forming a working hypothesis about the creature's size, habits, and interaction with its environment, even in the absence of definitive visual confirmation. For hours submerged, sightings remained elusive, leaving only ambiguous shapes and subtle displacements of sediment as proof of a presence below. Each dive offered fragments of evidence: a shadow curling behind a submerged log, a sudden ripple that faded before it could be traced, but nothing conclusive. The combination of darkness, depth, and complex underwater vegetation meant the creature could move with near total invisibility. These fleeting interactions maintained suspense while frustrating attempts at definitive identification, reminding the team that Lake Tele's depths were largely unexplored and profoundly mysterious. Teams coordinated closely with remote-operated vehicles, adjusting lighting and sonar frequency to track irregular pulses that might indicate a large unknown organism. Operators communicated continuously, noting each anomaly's size, duration, and movement trajectory. The sophistication of these technological methods allowed the team to extend observation beyond what human divers could safely achieve. Yet even with these tools, clarity remained elusive. Each adjustment provided incremental information, building a cautious sense of discovery without ever fully revealing the organism. During one particularly tense dive, a shadow glided past the camera lens with deliberate speed, vanishing behind a submerged tree trunk as water currents swirled unpredictably. Heart rates rose on the control deck as operators replayed the footage, scrutinizing every frame for identifiable traits. The team debated whether this was a large known species, a misinterpretation of light refraction, or a glimpse of the long-necked creature that had motivated the expedition. The ambiguity itself became a central aspect of the investigation, highlighting the tension between scientific method and the unknown. Even after compiling days of observations, no definitive image existed, only a series of indirect signs that hinted at something far larger and more elusive than the eye could confirm. Sediment disturbances, repeated sonar echoes, and minor water displacements formed a puzzle the researchers could piece together only partially. Their models indicated an organism with substantial length, flexibility, and intelligence in navigating submerged obstacles, but without direct observation it remained hypothetical. Each anomaly suggested presence and intention, yet the full creature remained hidden beneath the water's surface. Silent stirrings in the lake's deepest reaches hinted at a life carefully concealed but constantly moving within the team's field of study. Repeated dives, cross-referencing sonar readings with environmental data and local testimony, reinforced the idea of a dominant aquatic inhabitant. The elusive nature of the organism made it simultaneously compelling and maddening, challenging the team's understanding of freshwater ecosystems in ways that blurred the line between folklore and scientific discovery. Lake Tele had revealed itself as a living, layered world, its secrets guarded by darkness, depth, and the unseen presence of a creature beyond known classification. Under the dark expanse of Lake Tele, an unseen life continued its silent patrol, leaving only faint disturbances to hint at a secret long hidden from human knowledge. The Kamchatka Peninsula Thermal Zone Survey, Russia. Far from major population centres, the Kamchatka Peninsula stretches along Russia's eastern edge as a landscape shaped by constant geological unrest, where volcanoes, fumaroles, and steaming valleys create conditions unlike almost anywhere else on Earth. This remote region contains one of the highest concentrations of active volcanoes on the planet, with more than 160 identified volcanic structures and dozens still active. Within these thermal zones, researchers have long studied extremophile organisms that thrive in heat once thought lethal. Yet, alongside these scientific efforts, persistent accounts describe a large, heat-tolerant biological presence moving through geothermal valleys, a possibility that quietly influenced the scope of this survey. Unlike conventional wildlife expeditions, the Kamchatka Thermal Zone Survey was designed around environmental extremes rather than known species distribution, focusing on how prolonged geothermal activity reshapes ecosystems at every level. Scientists working in the region have documented algae, bacteria, and insects surviving in acidic pools and superheated runoff channels, forming the base of unusual food webs. However, satellite thermal imagery revealed intermittent heat signatures larger than any known organism, appearing briefly near volcanic vents before vanishing. These anomalies were rare and inconsistent, but their scale suggested biological movement rather than simple geothermal fluctuation, raising questions about whether larger organisms could exploit thermal corridors invisible to standard observation. The survey concentrated heavily on the Valley of Geysers, one of the largest geyser fields in the world, where temperature gradients shift sharply over short distances and create narrow zones of survivable heat. Field teams recorded ambient ground temperatures exceeding safe human exposure, while nearby mosses and microbial mats flourished. Local researchers noted that certain trails showed repeated disturbance despite limited animal traffic, with compressed soil patterns inconsistent with bears or ungulates known to inhabit the peninsula. These disturbances appeared repeatedly along geothermal runoff channels, suggesting deliberate movement through zones most predators avoid, reinforcing speculation that an unknown organism could be using heat as a form of natural concealment. Instrument deployment became a critical component of the survey, with heat-resistant camera traps, seismic sensors, and thermal probes installed along volatile slopes. Despite careful placement, several devices failed prematurely, not from lava exposure but from abrupt thermal surges that exceeded projected models. Data logs showed sudden spikes followed by rapid cooling, patterns that did not align with volcanic activity cycles documented by geologists. The irregularity of these surges complicated analysis and limited visual confirmation, but they suggested transient heat displacement, consistent with mass movement across superheated terrain rather than static geological events. Kamchatka's isolation has preserved not only its ecosystems, but also regional folklore, much of which references dangerous zones avoided by hunters and herders. Indigenous Itelmen and Koryak traditions include accounts of areas where animals disappear near steaming ground, leaving behind scorched vegetation and disturbed earth. While these stories are often symbolic, researchers noted a striking overlap between described locations and modern geothermal maps. Oral histories frequently emphasize movement during low visibility conditions, such as heavy steam or snowfall, a pattern that mirrors the limited windows when the survey's sensors registered unexplained thermal disturbances. Biological feasibility remained a central question throughout the expedition, particularly whether a large organism could regulate body temperature in such unstable environments. Studies of known thermophilic species demonstrate adaptive proteins and heat-dissipating structures at microscopic scales, but no verified megafauna possess comparable traits. Yet Kamchatka's geothermal zones produce microclimates where external heat could offset metabolic demands, allowing an organism to conserve energy while remaining warm in sub-zero air temperatures. Researchers cautiously explored this hypothesis, acknowledging its speculative nature while recognizing that extreme environments have historically produced unexpected biological adaptations. Tracks discovered near volcanic ash fields added complexity to the survey's findings, as several impressions lacked clear anatomical matches to known species. The marks appeared elongated, with uneven depth distribution suggesting variable weight transfer across soft terrain. Volcanologists confirmed that the ash layer had settled evenly before disturbance, eliminating wind or seismic activity as explanations. While no definitive conclusions were drawn, the track's proximity to thermal runoff paths and their repeated appearance across multiple sites suggested intentional travel rather than random environmental disruption. Weather conditions further complicated the survey, as Kamchatka's rapid storms and heavy snowfall routinely erased surface evidence within hours. This forced researchers to rely heavily on indirect data such as heat differentials, seismic vibrations, and localized vegetation damage. In several instances, mossbeds near fumaroles were found flattened and partially desiccated, despite surrounding plant life remaining intact. Botanists involved in the project noted that such patterns typically result from brief, intense heat exposure combined with pressure, an unusual combination outside controlled geothermal events. Comparisons with other volcanic regions provided limited clarity, as few locations combine Kamchatka's geothermal density with its relative ecological isolation. Similar thermal zones in Iceland and Yellowstone are heavily monitored and show no evidence of large unknown organisms, yet Kamchatka's remoteness limits continuous observation. The peninsula's sparse infrastructure and restricted access have left vast areas effectively unstudied, creating gaps in long-term data collection. Researchers emphasized that the absence of evidence in comparable regions does not automatically invalidate localized anomalies into environments as extreme and variable as Kamchatka. Long-term seismic monitoring stations operated by Russian geophysical institutes added another layer of complexity to the survey, as low-frequency ground vibrations were occasionally recorded in geothermal valleys without corresponding volcanic tremors. These signals differed from tectonic activity and lacked the sharp signatures associated with landslides or ice movement, appearing instead as sustained rhythmic disturbances that briefly travelled across uneven terrain. While such readings are sometimes attributed to hydrothermal fluid movement, the directional consistency of several events puzzled analysts reviewing the data. In areas where these vibrations were strongest, surface inspections later revealed subtle soil compression and altered runoff paths, suggesting repeated physical presence rather than isolated geological shifts. As the expedition progressed, safety considerations increasingly shaped operational decisions, particularly after several near-miss incidents involving unstable ground near geysers. One monitoring station was abandoned after sudden subsurface heating caused partial ground collapse, narrowly missing installed equipment. Geological assessments later confirmed that such events occur unpredictably when underground channels shift. These hazards restricted human presence in precisely the zones where unexplained data points were most frequent, leaving many questions unanswered despite months of observation. Satellite data reviewed after the field phase revealed a pattern previously overlooked, involving thermal anomalies that appeared to follow topographical contours rather than fault lines. These movements occurred at speeds inconsistent with lava flow or gas release, suggesting displacement across the surface rather than beneath it. While the resolution was insufficient to identify shape or form, the consistency of directional movement raised renewed interest in biological explanations, even as researchers stressed the need for caution and further verification. The survey concluded without visual confirmation of an unknown organism, yet its findings reshaped understanding of Kamchatka's geothermal ecosystems and their unexplored potential. By documenting repeated environmental disturbances in zones previously considered biologically marginal, the expedition highlighted how much remains unknown about life's capacity to adapt. Official reports framed the anomalies as unresolved environmental interactions, but internal discussions acknowledged that existing models failed to explain all observed data, leaving open the possibility that Kamchatka's thermal corridors shelter more than microbial life. Long after the equipment was removed and the last data analysed, the unanswered patterns lingered, suggesting that something capable of enduring heat, instability and isolation may still move quietly across the peninsula's most dangerous ground.